Rick Hammond thought freedom from prison meant a fresh start, but coming home unveiled a nightmare: his wife Tracy's betrayal with his best friend Manny. Shattered by the discovery, Rick's love turns to rage. Torn between vengeance and the need to protect his daughter Anya, Rick faces a harrowing choice. Confronting Manny only deepens his pain, pushing him to the brink. Yet Rick's resolve to become a better man for Anya's sake keeps him grounded. Tracy's guilt gnaws at her, fueling the tension. Will Rick's quest for redemption triumph over his thirst for revenge? This is his journey. Witness the turmoil. Rick lifted his head and looked up at the sun as if he was seeing it for the first time. A cool breeze gently brushed against his face. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath of the fresh air. Was the sun brighter today? Was it warmer? Did the air smell nicer? No. The only thing that felt different was that today he was free. He glanced over his shoulder and saw his past behind him. The gates of the place where he had lived for the last 4 years slammed shut with a loud noise. That sound was one he never wanted to hear again. He had no plans to go back. A loud squeal pulled him out of his thoughts. He turned just in time to see something beautiful across the parking lot. His wife, Tracy, was running towards him. "Is this real? Please tell me I'm awake." Tears ran down her cheeks as she cried. This moment, this feeling, it was what he had dreamed of every night for the last 4 years. When the lights went out in his cell, it had been dark. That darkness kept him from losing his mind. For the first time in a long time, he sighed in relief and let his tears flow. He was finally where he was meant to be. That place behind him was not for him. This was home in the arms of the one person who loved him. "Yes, honey, I'm really here, and I'm never leaving you again, if it was possible." Tracy held on to him tightly. She was scared he would disappear, like a dream ending, and she would wake up alone. Finally, when he could hardly breathe, he said, "Honey, you need to let me go." "No, I can't." He chuckled softly. "If you don't, I might pass out." Slowly, her grip loosened, and she let her feet touch the ground. She looked up at him and giggled through her happy tears. "Sorry about that," she said shyly. He shrugged. "You don't need to say sorry for being so happy to see me. There are worse ways to hold someone tight." She looked him over, her eyes wide with surprise. "Wow, you look amazing," she joked. "Oh my God, where did this handsome guy come from?" She could not remember him looking so good the last time she had seen him, which was just a month ago. The orange jumpsuit hid his true self. What should I do with him tonight? She wondered, a smile on her face. Rick felt himself blush. There's not much to do. Lifting weights is kind of my thing. Yeah, she giggled, not hiding her thoughts at all. The moment was broken by a harsh, deep breath. Rick looked around Tracy to see her mother, his mother-in-law, standing off to the side. She was watching them with a blank expression. "Hi, Derek." She said this with a chilly smile, almost like it hurt to say his name. Her face showed her dislike for him, her son-in-law. She was the only one who could make his name sound terrible, almost like it belonged next to names from history like Hitler and Stalin. "Martha?" He nodded politely. He didn't want to get her involved in their talk. Even her clear dislike for him couldn't spoil his day. He was free after spending 4 long years in a small cell. He had faced mean guards, angry prisoners, and food that barely filled his stomach. He was a free man. God, it felt amazing. What could be better than this? Holding Martha's hand tightly, he found the answer. A little girl peeked out from behind Martha's legs with big, scared eyes. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Amazed, he said, "It's on you." Martha turned to the girl, answering him without delay. "Come and say hello to your daddy." The girl looked unsure about the big man hugging her mom. She still held on to her grandmother's hand, squeezing it tighter and pulling back. Martha smiled at her granddaughter in a soft voice. "Don't worry, sweetie, he won't hurt you. Grandma won't let him." Anya looked up at her grandmother, seeking comfort. Then she slowly let go of her hand and moved closer to Rick. He set Martha aside and crouched down, trying to look less scary at his daughter's level. He smiled and opened his arms wide. As Anya got closer, he seemed less frightening. When she finally reached him, he wrapped his arms around her. "Hello, Anya," Rick said, his deep voice filling her ears. She clung to his neck and said, "Hi, Daddy." In that moment, everything broke loose, and Rick couldn't hold back his tears. Tracy gently covered her mouth, watching her husband and daughter hug. Even Martha felt moved by the moment. Soon after, the four of them drove home. Rick sat in the back with Anya while Tracy sat in the front. She turned around to talk to Rick. Martha drove quietly, sometimes looking in the rearview mirror and rolling her eyes. "What do you want to eat tonight, baby? Anything you want. I'll get it for you. Just say it," Tracy said. The adults all understood the playful hint in her words. How long was this drive? 3 hours. Why was Martha only driving 60? "Mom, be quiet," Tracy told her mother sharply. Martha glanced at her daughter, shook her head, and then focused back on the road. "That's not how you should talk in front of your child," she thought. Though she said, "I just asked him what he wanted for dinner." "Mom," Tracy said urgently, even though she wasn't telling the truth. "Stop thinking the worst." Martha just hummed and said, "Of course I asked." Tracy, looking mad, said, "He's my husband, a husband I haven't seen in 4 years. If I have to talk like that, who else can I talk to?" Martha gave her daughter a look that made Tracy close her mouth tight. "You really don't want to take this further with me, young lady," Martha warned. Tracy's eyes went wide. She seemed shocked that her mother would say that. Then a smile appeared on her face. It looked like she wanted to fight back with words, but she chose to stay quiet instead. She turned around in her seat, crossed her arms, and pouted. Rick, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, noticed something was off, but he didn't know what it was. Tracy usually didn't back down from fights, especially with her mom. Still, he let it go. Whatever it was between those two. He wouldn't spend his first day of freedom being the referee. He had better things to do. He looked to his side at the little girl in the car seat next to him. She was watching him closely, as if trying to figure him out. He smiled gently, hoping to make her feel more at ease. She did not smile back. Instead, she looked at him with careful eyes. He noticed she was holding a book. The book showed a blonde girl in a white dress standing in front of an ice castle, along with a strange snowman and a dark-haired boy. "Can I see your book?" he asked, reaching out. She quickly pulled it away from him as if she was protecting it. He raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "It's her favorite book," Martha said from the driver's seat. Rick met her eyes in the mirror. "We gave it to her for Christmas last year because she loves Frozen." "What's Frozen?" Rick asked, glad to chat with Martha. He hadn't realized she wanted to talk more. With a proud smile, she replied, "Frozen is a kid's movie that came out not that long ago." "You wouldn't know that because, well, you know," Mom said, warning Tracy. But ignoring her, Martha went on. "There are only 2 people she trusts with that book, me and her mother. We're the only ones who came after her. We're her family." Rick could see that her words hit him deep. He turned his gaze away from her eyes and looked out the window. He took a deep breath and pressed his lips together as he thought. He watched the world fly by as they drove. This was how his life felt. Tracy shot an angry glance at her mother. Martha acted like nothing was wrong. She turned on the radio to cover up the awkward quiet. Sometimes, she could be really hard to deal with. Tracy thought she heard a buzzing noise from her purse. She quietly took out her phone, read a message, quickly typed a reply, and put it back. A small smile appeared on her face, almost like she was shy. Anyone else looking at her might not think twice about it. But her mother noticed. Tracy looked at her mom, trying to see if she had seen anything. She quickly looked away, but a hint of guilt showed on her face, telling a story without words. "You have to be joking," Martha thought, shaking her head in disbelief. The car ride to Martha's house took 3 hours, but for the 4 people traveling, it felt like forever. The 3 adults were lost in their own thoughts, each dealing with their own worries. The only one who showed impatience was a 5-year-old stuck in a car seat for too long. A week later, Rick stood in front of a brick building, looking at the numbers above the door. He checked a piece of paper in his hand to make sure he was at the right place. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. About to knock, he spotted a small intercom with a button. A note on the intercom said to press for Officer Larry Giuliani. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, and just as he was ready to press it a 3rd time, an annoyed female voice asked, "Name?" "My name is Derek Morrison." After a moment, the door squeaked open, telling Rick it wasn't locked anymore. Once inside, he found a narrow, dim hallway with stairs in front of him. The stairs led up to an office area. The first desk he saw belonged to an older woman who looked just like her voice on the intercom. She didn't greet him. Her bored expression showed she had been doing this job for a long time. She handed him a clipboard with a form. "Have a seat over there. Fill this out and Larry will call you in." She pointed to some chairs against the wall. The first page of the form was easy. It asked about his home life, how he was feeling since getting out of prison, and if he had any thoughts of harming himself. The second page asked about his job plans, his skills, and what job he would like to have. Rick filled out the form just as a deep, squeaky voice came from a nearby office. "Send him to Linda." Linda, the receptionist, looked at Rick. Thankfully, she didn't repeat that Officer Giuliani was ready to see him, as if he hadn't heard. Instead, she just nodded her head towards the door he should use. The office was small and not very nice. It felt cramped and messy. Papers were all over the desk, scattered everywhere. In one corner was a fake plant that made the room feel warm, and in the other corner stood an old black file cabinet. "Good morning, officer," Rick said, feeling a little nervous as the big man behind the desk looked up from his computer screen. The parole officer didn't reply. He just stared at Rick over his glasses, which were resting on the edge of his nose. He seemed to be judging Rick. Not sure what to do, Rick stood there, unsure if he should sit in one of the chairs, wait to be invited to sit, or extend his hand for a handshake. Being on the other side of a tall, barbed wire fence for 4 years is a long time. Life in prison is very different from outside. Inside, every action could put your life in danger. There was a pecking order among inmates that had to be respected, but you couldn't let yourself be too scared either. There was a thin line between showing respect and being weak. If you didn't show respect to someone important, the wrong people might hurt you. On the other hand, if you tried too hard to please them, you could end up being looked down on. Even with the guards, there were unspoken rules. Agreeing with them too quickly could lead other inmates to think you were a snitch. That was a bad mistake. But being openly disobedient could bring several guards to your cell in the night. Many inmates had a terrible accident and ended up needing help after some quiet time with those guards. "Sit down," Officer Giuliani said, then began searching through the many folders on his desk. Once he found the right one, he adjusted his glasses and read its contents. "You seem to be quite lucky, Mr. Morrison. Very lucky. You were convicted of possession with intent to sell. The judge gave you 6 years, but you only served 4. You are one of 468 people who got a second chance from a governor who wanted to appear fair about the prison system. He signed pardons for inmates who committed nonviolent crimes and behaved well." "Yes, sir," Rick replied, unsure of what to say. "They also say you were part of the Manchester Child Gang, or Manny. Is that true?" "Supposedly," Rick said carefully, making sure he understood what he was agreeing to. "Manny was never found guilty of running a gang." Officer Giuliani looked up from his file, raising an eyebrow. "That's true," he said. "He wasn't found guilty because you didn't help the district attorney get what he wanted. He wanted Mr. Childs, not you. You were just a small fish who could have gotten only 18 months if you had cooperated and provided information about the big players. Instead, you left your wife and child to serve your time." Rick stayed calm and looked Officer Giuliani in the eye. "With all due respect, sir, that's disrespectful. I've paid for my mistakes. I'm not anyone's servant, especially not Manny's. The choices I made were my own. Now I just want to move on with my life, with my wife and daughter." Officer Giuliani nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair, which creaked a bit under him. He folded his hands together and rested them on his belly. He admired how Rick dealt with his past. It was positive. After working for so long, the officer had a good sense of which parolees would follow the rules and which would not. Yet he struggled to understand why people in tough neighborhoods stayed so loyal to the gangs that harmed their communities. No one wanted to help stop the crime. On one hand, they protested in the streets, but right after, they sang songs that celebrated drug use. Then they treated police officers like they were the bad guys. He thought about how much better those neighborhoods could be if the decent people came together to fight against crime. How many young lives could be saved if the gang and drug lifestyle was recognized as a major problem rather than celebrated? He wondered. But that was a topic for another time. The current conversation was going nowhere, so he decided to change it. Let's wrap this up, Mr. Morrison. How was your week? Rick welcomed the shift and replied happily, It's been great, sir. I'm a happy man. Being home with my wife and daughter feels like a dream. Officer Giuliani nodded, then asked, How are your living arrangements? I understand you and your family are staying with your mother-in-law. He looked through the papers until he found a name. Miss Martha James. Is everything okay with her? Do you get along? Rick paused, not wanting to raise concerns about his parole. One of the rules was that he needed stable housing. We're on good terms, he finally said. His pause spoke volumes and gave the officer some hint of Rick's true feelings. Okay, that's fair enough, Officer Giuliani responded. You aren't the first person who has been in trouble with the law to stay at someone's home who isn't sure they want you there. So try to fit in. Don't bring any problems to her. Be quiet when you need to be, but helpful when you can. Wash the dishes, help with cooking, take out the trash. But most importantly, find a job. People who do this usually find a happy life at home while on parole. Understood. Officer Giuliani was starting to like Rick and changed the topic again. He opened a drawer and took out a small cup with a lid. He placed it on the desk in front of Rick. For the first 6 months, you will take a urine test at every visit. After that, I can give surprise tests whenever I want. I'll also visit your home, both planned and unplanned, to check on you. Rick replied, Yes, sir, as he took the cup. Good. Now here's the important part. There are some things that can send you back to prison. Failing the test is one. Another is if I see you with your old friends. That guy is trouble. Rick found it hard to keep a straight face. Manny was his best friend. Manny had been there for him when his dad died and had helped him while he was in jail. Staying away from Manny felt like staying away from family. Still, Rick nodded and said again, Yes, sir, no illegal activity at all. If you stay out of trouble and find a job, you'll have a good future. Officer Giuliani saw Rick's nod and said, You look like you need to use the bathroom. When the test results came back clean, Officer Giuliani talked to Rick about finding work. There were programs to help people like him find jobs. The jobs weren't great and paid little, but it was better than nothing. When the visit was over, the parole officer walked Rick outside. It seemed nice, but really, he just wanted a smoke. Still, he handed Rick his business card. This is my number. My office hours are 8 to 5. He flipped the card and showed Rick a handwritten number on the back. Looking Rick in the eye, he said, This is my cell phone. I don't give this number to everyone. I only give it to people I think will try to do the right thing. You seem like a good kid. If you find yourself in a tough spot or just need to talk, call this number. If I don't answer, leave a message. Rick took the card and stared at the handwritten number. It was the first sign that Officer Giuliani cared. Thank you, sir. Then, pulling out a pack of cigarettes, he took one out and lit it. And if you ever want to talk about the case in Manchester, call me for that too. I know the detective working on it. I can promise you he will be happy to hear from you. He'll probably get you anything you ask for. Wit Pro, a nice, warm place for you and your family. Who knows? I'll keep that in mind. He said this even though they both knew he was not telling the truth. With that, Rick walked to the bus stop, leaving Officer Giuliani to finish his cigarette. Next part. After his meeting with the parole officer, Rick felt hopeful on the bus ride to his mother-in-law's house. He read papers about job programs that would help him earn money in a good way. He wanted to change Martha's mind about him. For some reason, it mattered to him what she thought. He knew she hadn't liked him much. She never hid it either. Before he went to prison, he didn't care what she thought at all. Tracy loved him, and that was all he needed. But now things were different. The world had changed. He was different too. Plus, he had a little girl to think about. While he was in prison, he shared his cell with a man who became like an older brother. Craig was older and was serving a life sentence. He had been in prison since he was 25. He had 3 kids, but only one of them visited him. The other 2 wanted nothing to do with him. Craig often talked about his regrets. He had a lot. Every day he woke up with it, showered with it, and even ate with it. It was always there, like a shadow. One day, Craig said something that stuck with Rick. He said that sons become like their fathers, and daughters often marry men like their dads. If a father hurt the mother, chances are it will happen again in the next generation. The mistakes of a father can follow the children long after he is gone. That's the way life works. What someone leaves behind matters most. Forget about money, fancy things, and women. Great men achieve great things, but real legends leave behind memories. When a coffin goes into the ground, all that is left are memories. What kind of husband did he want for Anna? Did he want her to marry a drug dealer who wanted quick cash? A man who couldn't keep a job or take care of his family? No way. Rick was set on earning Martha's respect. She was his mirror. Tracy would love him no matter what, even if he made mistakes. She would stick by him. But Martha had no bonds with him, no loyalty. If he earned her respect, he could also earn his daughter's respect. He wanted to show her that he had changed, even if it meant staying away from his brother. As he walked from the bus stop to his mother-in-law's house, he saw a shiny black BMW convertible parked in front of his mother's house. The wheels matched the color of the car. Those 4 wheels looked like they cost 100 grand. When he opened the front door of his house, he found Manny sitting on his mother-in-law's couch. Manny was leaning back on the cushions, with one ankle on his knee and his arm draped over the back of the couch. To anyone else, it would look like Manny lived there. Anya was playing happily on the floor, completely unfazed by the unknown man sitting just a few feet away. "There he is, the man, the myth, the legend," Manny said with a big grin. "Wow, you've really grown," Tracy said. "You look stronger than ever. Didn't expect this. You look full of energy." Rick remembered what his probation officer had told him just an hour ago. He wanted to do the right thing for himself and his family, but he couldn't just tell Manny to leave. "What's going on, Manny?" Rick asked, unsure of himself. Manny didn't seem to notice his hesitation. He got up, walked over, and hugged Rick tightly. The scent of Manny's fancy cologne filled Rick's nose. His expensive sneakers and designer clothes showed that he was doing well for himself. Tracy stepped out of the kitchen and walked toward Rick. "Hey, kid," she said, finally taking a deep breath. "How was your first meeting with your parole officer?" "It was fine. He gave me some papers on how to find a job, made me take a urine test, and talked about staying out of trouble," Rick replied. Then, in a bit of a joke, he looked at Manny and added, "He said to stay away from you." "Really? He said that? How does he know me?" Manny chuckled. Rick shrugged. "He's a cop. And you? You've been in trouble before." In that moment, Manny's gaze shifted to Tracy. It was quick, but Rick noticed it. There was something in Manny's eyes that made Rick uncomfortable. Manny looked at her with a smirk, and Rick recognized that look. He had seen Manny look at many women like that before. It was a familiar smile, as if he knew something about her. Rick felt uneasy. He realized that Manny's looks usually came with strange stories about what he and the woman were doing. They would laugh about it, but there was nothing funny about it now. Tracy quickly looked away, stepped out of Rick's embrace, and went back to the kitchen. Rick felt a mix of emotions. Maybe it was because he had been away from Tracy for so long, or maybe he just had a sense for reading people. Whatever the reason, he picked up on a tension that made him uneasy. He didn't want to think about it. He couldn't understand it. But there it was, right in front of him. It was clear. Manny was spending time with his wife. Rick touched Manny's shoulder to get his attention. He looked at Manny with a serious face. He nodded toward the front door and said, "Let's take a walk." They stepped outside and walked down the street. Manny's voice came to them now and then. "Listen, Rick, I came by to thank you in person. You could have fed me, but you didn't. You made it real and stayed quiet. I respect that." Rick did not want to talk about it yet. He wanted to wait until they were far from the house. Once they were a good distance away, Rick stopped walking. Manny noticed and stopped too. When he turned around, he saw Rick frowning. "Is that the only reason you came?" Rick asked with a bit of anger in his voice. "What?" Manny said, laughing as if Rick was joking. Rick closed the gap between them, giving Manny a hard look. "I came home and found you on my couch, my wife in the kitchen, and my daughter playing on the floor. My mother-in-law is at work. You were alone with her. Is there something you want to tell me?" Manny just laughed again, thinking Rick was being silly. You're seriously tripping right now." There was no denial or confusion in Manny's eyes. "Really?" asked Rick, stepping closer until they were just a few inches apart. "I've known you for a long time, Manny. Look me in the eye and tell me you weren't having fun with Tracy." The smile slowly left Manny's face. The calm look was gone, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "You've been gone for a long time, Rick. I know that. But things have changed while you were away." Rick noticed Manny's hand slowly lifting his shirt, revealing a gun tucked in his waistband. "The only reason I haven't used this is because you're like a brother to me. Other people who tried what you just did didn't get this chance. Now I suggest you take a couple of steps back and lower your voice." As angry as he was, Rick's mind took over. Yes, he and Manny were friends, and he knew what Manny could do. Would he be able to stop Manny before it was too late? Maybe, but if he grabbed the gun and they fought, he could end up in jail again. He didn't want to take that risk, so he took a step back. But he didn't give up. He still looked Manny in the eye and quietly asked, "Did you entertain her?" To his credit, Manny let out a sigh as if he felt bad about what had happened. Instead of answering, he said, "Look, man, that's a question for her." It was funny how that vague answer still gave Rick some information, but Rick needed to hear more. He said, "But I'm asking you, man, just tell me the truth, okay?" Manny sighed and finally started to talk. "Look, if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. You know you weren't supposed to be gone for 6 years. Tracy couldn't wait that long. You should have known that. The fact that she stayed strong for as long as she did shows that. So yes, you were with my wife. She needed someone, so it might as well be you," Rick said through gritted teeth, fighting back angry tears. "You were supposed to protect her. What did I do?" Manny yelled, his feelings taking over too. "Do you know how many diapers I bought for Anna? How many times I helped Tracy pay for groceries? Who do you think got your daughter those toys she was just playing with? See those new clothes she's wearing? Guess who paid for them? Me. That's right, me." Rick's eyes felt like they were on fire. His fists were so tight that his nails were digging into his skin. If Manny had not been on his knees, Rick would have been right on top of him. But he held back. Instead, he asked, "So you want to take my place? Do you want my family?" "No, Rick," Manny replied, as if Rick was being silly. "You and I both know that Tracy could never see anyone else as you. I just wanted to help your family, like I helped you. I made sure you were taken care of. I even put money on your books so you could get what you needed. And I made sure Tracy had some cash so she didn't have to ask her mom for help too often. I tried to be there for you, so that gives you the right to be with her?" Manny shook his head, looking frustrated. "Look, maybe things went a bit too far, but it wasn't like the time she came to ask for money for Anya. I saw her crying. When I asked what was wrong, she told me how much she missed you. Then she just started crying hard." Manny spoke like he thought he had done nothing wrong, telling Rick the story like it was just a joke. He continued, "I made her a drink, and she started saying how she wanted you." He shrugged, thinking that made it all okay. Then things just happened from there. Noticing Rick was upset, Manny quickly added, "But it's all over now. As soon as she heard you were out of jail, she canceled everything. I backed off because I respected you." No questions were asked. But what if this was meant to calm Rick's anger? It did the opposite. It made him so mad that he felt sick. A heavy feeling grew in his stomach as he realized something new. Maybe it was his pride trying to shield him, but he had created a story in his mind that made this easier to deal with. It was just a night of drinking, a mistake. But it wasn't a one-time thing. It kept happening until they found out he was one of the lucky 400. That's what the inmates called them. And that was only 6 months ago. Manny might have been spending years with his wife. What was Rick supposed to do with this news? Thank Manny for being a good guy and returning his troubled wife. Rick's hands started to shake. He struggled to breathe. His whole body tightened. His eyes turned red. Anna. She needed her father. She needed him to stay out of jail and never come back. That's what Rick kept telling himself in his mind. This was the only thing stopping the anger inside him, but it felt like it could break free at any moment. Manny saw the chaos brewing, a losing battle for control. Rick's feelings flashed across his face like a movie. His jaw clenched and his nostrils flared. Manny recognized that look. He had seen it many times before. Rick was standing on the edge, ready to jump. But Manny knew Rick as well as Rick knew himself. He was confused. This had always been his struggle. He was like a wolf pretending to be a friendly dog. He always tried to do the right thing, always trying to be someone he wasn't. Even when they were together doing illegal things, Rick made rules for himself that he didn't want to break. But it was all a lie. The stories he told himself gave him hope that he could be loved. Want to know the real Rick? Rick was the guy who could hurt someone badly for saying he would go after Tracy if he didn't get what he wanted. Even if he didn't hurt anyone, he left a strong impression that made people wary of him. But Rick also had an annoying need to be a martyr. Instead of hiding the messy parts of his life, he felt he had to share everything with Tracy. He wanted to be honest with her, to show her who he really was. He believed that honesty was important in marriage. He was ready to give up everything just to please her and her mom, and then he would complain to Manny about how bad he felt for constantly letting them down. Manny thought the real reason Rick felt guilty was because he didn't truly feel guilty. He told himself that deep down, he was a good person who just made bad choices. This frustrated Manny, but it was also why Rick was a helpful assistant. He was sharp enough to handle tough jobs, but he also felt enough guilt to avoid wanting to take charge. Rick's loyalty was just part of who he was. But now, for the first time, Manny wasn't sure what kind of person he would find in Rick. Having fun with his wife had made Rick a bit unpredictable. So Manny instinctively reached for the gun on his belt. He really didn't want to have to shoot his old friend to keep things from getting worse. Manny took a few steps back and said calmly, "Look, I'm going to leave before you do something we both might regret. I'm sorry you think I betrayed you. Someday I hope you'll see that I did you a favor. But that day isn't today, and that's okay." Manny's look turned serious and intense, and he gripped his weapon tighter. He spoke clearly, making sure Rick understood. "Don't let feelings take over your head. If you don't do anything reckless, you'll be fine. Got it?" Rick stared at the ground, worried that looking at Manny would make him lose what little strength he had left. In a trembling voice filled with anger, Rick said softly, "Get out of my sight, Manny. Leave and never come back. Stay away from Tracy and Anya." Finally, looking at his friend-turned-enemy, he added, "If you come back, I'll kill you, and you'll need more than this gun to stop me." Manny nodded and stepped back, never taking his eyes off Rick. Once he was far enough away, he walked to his car, leaving Rick standing alone. Tears of anger filled Rick's eyes as he heard the smooth sound of Manny's engine starting. His emotional pain felt so great it became physical. His head pounded, his stomach hurt, and his arms felt sore. Wait a minute. His hands were hurting. Looking down, he saw the marks of his fingernails digging into his palm, the skin around it red and swollen. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Tracy walking toward him. She stopped short when she saw his face, tears running down his cheeks, fists clenched. She understood. Damn, Manny. He had promised not to tell her anything. He had promised Rick. She started, but then stopped. What could she say? And even if she found the words, would he even listen? The only thing that stopped Rick from grabbing Tracy was the sight of his daughter standing in the doorway looking outside. He felt so angry that he was shaking. His daughter's lovely face reminded him of what he could lose. If he hurt Tracy now, he would lose Anya forever. He didn't want to become like the man who had hurt her mother. He couldn't do that. So Rick chose to walk away. But when he heard Tracy's footsteps behind him, he started to jog. Her voice called out for him to come back. This made him run. He felt like a coward. He had never run away from anything since he was a child. He had always been told to stand tall and fight until he couldn't anymore. Running away was for weak people, but he had run away from his unfaithful wife. The man who was with her just walked away. Yeah, he felt weak, but he would rather be weak than lose his daughter's love, so he ran far and fast. He ran until he couldn't hear Tracy's screams anymore. Part 2. Night came, and there was still no word from Rick. Tracy sat on the couch with her knees pulled up to her chest. She watched Anya play on the floor, but her mind was racing with guilt, fear, and worry. Next to her on the couch lay her phone, which had not rung once. She checked it to make sure there were no missed calls, none at all. The only person who replied to her worried texts was Manny. Yes, she knew she should not be texting him, especially after what happened. But she had to know what Manny had told Rick and how much he knew about them. What happened to keeping it a secret from Rick, Manny? He already knew. He asked me about it. He didn't say anything, but you must have told him. This is on you. How much time does he have left? A lot. He said he would kill me. I can't take this drama anymore. Change my number and find yourself a man before I have to deal with this. Ugh, Tracy thought, glancing at the time. It had been almost 4 hours since Rick had run off. Her worry grew from concern to panic. She knew Rick could handle himself, but he had been gone for a long time. A lot had changed in the 4 years since he left. He didn't even have a phone to call her if something went wrong. Plus, he wasn't thinking straight when he ran away. Rick had a bad temper and often found trouble because of it. She could picture him getting into a fight with someone or arguing with a police officer who questioned him. If something happened to him because of her, she would never forgive herself. Please let him be okay. Just then, she heard a noise on the front porch. She looked at the front door and perked up when she heard the doorknob jingle. Her heart raced a little. But when the door opened, it was her mother, not her husband, who walked in with a sad look on her face. Martha sank into a chair. She absent-mindedly sorted through the mail she had taken from the mailbox. Bills, bills, and more bills. She sighed. "Hi, Trace," she said when she spotted her daughter on the couch. Her voice sounded tired as she came inside. Everything about her looked like she had a tough day. Anya jumped up from her seat and ran to her, squealing with happiness to see her grandma. She wrapped her small arms around one of Martha's legs. Even though she was tired, Martha smiled at her granddaughter. She dropped a stack of papers onto the coffee table and bent down to greet Anya properly. "Hello, pretty girl," Martha said in a cheerful voice. "How's Grandma's favorite little girl?" "I'm hungry," Anya replied with a big smile, showing her teeth, but her face looked confused. "Your mom didn't make you anything to eat?" Martha glanced at Tracy, ready to complain. But then she noticed something was wrong with her daughter. "Trace?" she asked, worried. She gently set Anya down and looked around. "Where's Derek?" Tracy's face fell and her lips trembled as she spoke. "I don't know." Then she started to cry hard. Martha thought with anger, "That jerk. Not even a week since he was here, and he's already causing trouble again. I shouldn't have let him in." She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Even though she wanted to talk to Tracy about her troubled husband, she knew she had to feed her granddaughter first. So she went to the kitchen, put on an apron, and opened the fridge to see what she could make. Dealing with Derek could wait. In the next scene, Rick took a deep breath. He leaned over the railing of a bridge, watching cars pass below. The sounds of speeding cars, trucks, and loud engines mixed with the wind. Since he was a kid, this place had always fascinated him. The noise and activity of the traffic were kind of relaxing, no matter what was happening in his life. This spot reminded him that he was just one small person in a world full of billions. There was always someone who had it worse than him. In each car below drove a person with their own story. How many of them had unfaithful partners? How many had made bad choices? Where were those people going? Where did they come from? What had happened to get them in that car at that particular moment? It was a lot to think about. As strange as it was, these thoughts helped him feel less lonely. After he talked to his ex-girlfriend, lots of thoughts rushed through Rick's mind. Anger made his legs feel alive as he ran away from Tracy. The excitement made him keep going, even when his lungs felt like they might burst. He felt he had to run, as if moving quickly could make the burning anger inside him go away. But soon, he had to stop. Anger only pushes you so far. His life showed him that. Eventually, you have to pause and see where your anger has taken you. Often you find yourself in a place where the results of your actions wait for you. Luckily for Rick, he found himself in a better spot. Maybe deep down he had come to this peaceful place from his childhood. His mind wandered a lot now. Surprisingly, he wasn't thinking too much about Tracy. Instead, he thought about life and his mother, who had been lost to him because of a random act of violence. She had passed away when he was just 10. There was a song she used to sing to him when he felt scared. It always made him feel safe, but he had forgotten that song long ago. He could hardly remember her face, which once bothered him. Now, forgetting her felt wrong. After his mother died, his father sank deep into drinking. His father was full of anger. The police knew him well because he spent so much time trying to find those who caused his pain. The more the police failed him, the more he drank. After years of empty hopes, he finally gave up. On the 5th anniversary of her death, he followed his father to the grave. The police report said he had driven drunk and fallen asleep at the wheel. But Rick felt his father chose that night for a reason. His father always drank before driving. He didn't know how to do it any other way since he was hardly ever sober. Until that night. He had never gotten into trouble while driving before. Maybe it was just an accident. But everything that happened felt too strange to be a coincidence. No matter the cause, the end result was still the same. Rick was all alone in the world and had to take care of himself. So, like many teens without a family, he looked for a new one. At that time, he and Manchester were just young street kids. Street kids are often victims in a bigger game. The fight against drugs really meant going after small-time criminals. No one wanted to deal with the bigger players unless there was a big reward. It took too much effort, and it just created new leaders to fight against. Still, some things did push the police to work harder. When it was time for elections, officials wanted to impress the people. They sought to be known in the community. When the police started losing their good name and the FBI began looking into their actions, things changed. The police had to leave the donut shops and hit the streets to catch a big fish. In time, Manchester moved from being a small player to a major player in the game. He did things for his boss that most people would find shocking. But just like any street leader, his life ended too soon. This led to a fierce struggle for power, much like a modern-day Game of Thrones. Gangs fought each other to see who would be the new leader. The Sanchez family, known as the Colombians, wanted to join this battle to find their next distributor. They were like ghosts, working quietly behind the scenes. They didn't care who won. They just wanted to make the new winner very rich, just like the last one. Rick and Manny had to deal with many possible leaders. The fight changed them deeply, making them do terrible things. Rick acted out of fear for his life, while Manny began to enjoy the power he had gained. This newfound strength made him feared on the streets. His name became known as the Boogeyman. If people spoke of him in a disrespectful way, it meant he or Rick would visit them, and that visit would not end well. Manny had become powerful. He was now a king. Election time was coming for the mayor. This meant he needed a big success. A great win needed a big name. The biggest name. Instead of going after the Sanchez family, they focused on Manchester. He was the public face, taking all the blame so the real players could stay hidden. Long live the king! The district attorney and the police chief were set on capturing Manny, and they chased him down hard. Sadly, people were split into two groups. Some feared Manny and Rick more than the police, while others didn't know enough to help. So the police changed their plan. Instead of going after the king, they decided to take down his knight. If they could flip him, everything else would fall apart. But there was just one problem. Manny's knight was too loyal. They tried everything to scare Rick into turning against Manny. When those tactics failed, they went after what mattered most to him, his family. By that time, Rick had saved a lot of money. He was good at cutting hair, so he owned a barber shop. But this shop was really a way to clean Manny's dirty money. At least a third of Manny's money passed through Rick's business. Still, it was a real shop. He had barbers working for him and many happy customers. He even cut his own hair sometimes. Rick was doing well. He bought his wife the house he always wanted in the suburbs. She got a new car and a closet full of nice clothes. Rick and Tracy were thinking about sending their daughter, Anya, to a private school when she was older. Life was nice until the DEA agents barged into their home at 2 in the morning. Their plan was to take everything Rick had worked for. They wanted to seize his house, his cars, and more. If he didn't hand them over to Manchester, he would lose it all. But Rick stood his ground. He fought back in court. Unfortunately, his house was taken, and his barbershop was shut down. His car was sold, and he ended up in jail while waiting for his trial. Tracy and their baby had to move in with her mom. It was a tough time for his family. Things were hard for them, and any respect his mother-in-law had for him soon faded away. But Tracy stayed by his side. He believed she would be loyal. Many women might have quickly moved on to find someone else with more money, but Tracy didn't. She lived at her mother's house and worked at the local Walmart, facing gossip behind her back. The district attorney pushed hard but made mistakes and ended up losing big. The DA wanted to connect Rick to a criminal called Manny, accusing him of serious crimes. But the only charges that stuck were for drug possession and a gun charge. He couldn't even prove a gun charge, which would have given him a much stronger case. Without that, Rick wouldn't turn against his best friend. Even when things got hard, Tracy was still there. That's what confused Rick. How could she be so loyal yet also appear to betray him? She had kissed him when he was finally free, but now she was kissing Manny too. There were whispers that things turned complicated between Tracy and Manny, but their bond grew deeper beyond friendship. Despite Rick's busy life, he was honest and straightforward with Tracy. He never lied to her about where his money came from, which she found refreshing. It felt strange that a man in such a shady business could be the measure of honesty for her. Winning her trust was the first step to winning her heart, and he did both quickly. It didn't matter how Tracy dressed, whether she wore makeup or jeans. She owned every room she walked into. People joked about her working at Walmart, saying, "When did they start hiring Instagram models?" Still, Rick was drawn to her heart, which was kind and open. He wanted to protect her from anyone who might hurt her. She could cry during movies no matter what was happening on screen, showing just how delicate and beautiful her heart was. A sad scene played out with slow, heavy music. Tears fell. Then, a happy scene started, filled with lively, joyful music. More tears. A cute baby or some playful puppies were also there. She felt joy when she saw Rick. A big smile appeared on her face, showing all her bright teeth. As they walked together, she would hold his hand and pull him close. When they sat down, she leaned against him or stretched her legs across his lap. Her eyes sparkled when she looked at him. They could talk for hours, not even realizing that they hadn't done much all day. That's why he had no doubt when he proposed to her. When she handed him the pregnancy test, her voice shook, just like her hands. When he kissed her forehead and told her, "I'm here for you," she felt sure everything would be all right. He wasn't really surprised that she was pregnant, but as he thought back with clear eyes, he had to look at his marriage in a new way. He couldn't remember many details, but his mind kept nagging at him. It filled him with doubts about Tracy and Manny. Had they gone out together? Had they watched movies? Had they spent nights together? Had they played with Anna? How had he missed so much? All he wanted was to fix his life, to make things better. But people like him don't often get a second chance. The mistakes he made in the past stayed with him, making him feel like a failure. He tried to wash away his troubles, hoping one day he could feel clean inside. Night came, and the air felt chilly. He didn't have a cell phone, and payphones were nearly gone, so he had to walk home. In the next scene, Anya enjoyed macaroni and cheese with chicken and vegetables in the kitchen, while Martha pulled Tracy by the hand toward the back bedroom. "What's Derek doing in there? Is he bringing drugs into my house? I won't let this ruin my life. I've worked too hard for this." "What? Mom, no!" Tracy shouted, completely shocked. "He's not like that anymore. Why do you always think the worst of him?" Martha replied sharply, "Because he's a criminal, and I expect criminals to do bad things. I have common sense." "Forget it, Mom," Tracy said, waving her hand. "I don't want to argue with you. I have too much on my mind right now. He's not bringing anything bad into your home or doing anything wrong. Just get over it," Tracy said, placing her hands on her hips and tapping her foot. "If it's not Derek, then what's happening? Why are you here crying?" With reluctance, Tracy shared everything. She explained that Manny had come by a few hours earlier to check on her after being gone for 6 months. He was also eager to see Rick and welcome him back. She knew her mother wouldn't like Manny being at her house, so she felt nervous about telling her. She wasn't going to let him in the house, but he promised he would behave well, and mostly he did. Things took a turn when Rick arrived. You could feel the tension in the air, even though nothing had happened between her and Manny in a long time. It felt like Rick knew something was off as he walked in with them. Tracy felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew this was not going to go well. She felt regret. Why did she let Manny in? Why did she even spend time with him at all? Despite her worries, things didn't go as she thought they would. There was no argument. Instead, Rick just ran away. It might have been the best outcome she could hope for, but it still left her feeling empty. Rick ran away from her. Usually, Tracy could calm Rick down. Her smile could ease any tense moment. But this time was different. With her gone, there was nothing to stop Rick from getting angry. Yet somehow, he kept his cool and didn't lash out at Manny, even when he had every reason to be upset. How could that be? What could have made him so calm? Was it a sign he was changing, or did he simply not need her anymore like he used to? Martha listened closely, though she was very upset with her daughter. How could this go wrong? Please tell me I didn't raise you to be this foolish, Tracy, Martha thought with worry. Yes, her daughter was struggling, but she couldn't feel sorry when it seemed like chaos was happening in her house. What is wrong with you? Why do you think bringing him here was a good choice? One drug dealer in my house isn't enough for you, so you find another one and invite him over. Mom! Stop it! I have been plenty nice to you and the man who married you, even though I don't like him. Tracy stood up and looked her mother in the eyes. You can't call him a criminal anymore. He has done his time and paid for his mistakes. His name is Rick, and that's what you will call him. Martha sighed loudly and stared at her daughter. Part of her wanted to argue with this brave girl who stood up to her. Another part of her felt a bit of respect for Tracy. Martha knew that Rick had already spent some time in prison, but 4 years seemed very short for the terrible person they had said he was during the trial. Even if they couldn't prove everything against him, there was no way Rick could have bought that house and those cars with money from a crime that led to only a 4-year sentence. Still, Martha had given in. There was no way to make her daughter see Derek in any way other than as the man she loved, even with all his mistakes. Martha was sure of one thing. Derek loved her daughter too. The real question was whether he loved her enough not to put his wife and daughter through this kind of trouble again. Martha hoped so, but she didn't really think he would. Only time would show. Offering a small gesture of hope, she said, "When Derek shows me he's different, I'll look at him differently." Tracy smiled back at her mom, grateful for her understanding. "Give him a chance. He will change," Tracy said. Martha paused for a moment, but she needed to push those thoughts away because something else bothered her. "Let's talk about the fact that you had an affair with the biggest drug dealer in our neighborhood and let him into my house. You say you love your husband, but this looks very suspicious." Tracy looked down at the floor and sat back on the bed. "Manny and I are finished. It has been over for a long time. You don't need to keep reminding me of that." Martha narrowed her eyes and asked, "Who were you texting the day we went to pick up Rick? I saw you texting someone in the car on the way back. I caught you. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. Who was it?" Tracy hesitated for a moment, then made a guilty face before saying, "Okay, it was Manny." When Martha threw her hands in the air in frustration, Tracy quickly added, "But it wasn't anything like that. He just asked if we'd taken Rick." "Then why were you giggling like a lovesick girl?" Martha asked. "What? I wasn't giggling because of Manny," Tracy said. Martha looked at her, not believing her. After a moment, Tracy said, "Well, I think he was just asking if Rick had Hooters. I might have sent him an emoji with hearts or something. That was about a week ago. But you have to believe me, there's nothing between us." Martha shook her head. "How many times will you say that, Tracy? Saying it a lot doesn't change anything. It doesn't matter that you didn't have fun with him tonight. You did have fun with him while you were married and claiming to love your husband. You can't pretend it's nothing when you let chaos into my home. You're a grown woman and I've tried to stay out of your business, but you have a daughter to take care of. She should be your top priority, not chasing after these bad guys." Feeling she needed to defend herself and Derek, Tracy replied, "I don't chase men. I wasn't after Manny, but I was after Rick because he's not just a guy. He's my husband." Martha let out a frustrated snort. "You should have thought about that before having fun with someone else." Her mom had a point. She hadn't really thought about it at all. To make things worse, she was always getting attention from guys at work and on the street. Even the babysitter's boyfriend was testing her loyalty. She felt on edge and often snapped at little things. Yes, she loved Rick deeply, but she needed a way to feel free. Maybe that was the issue. Tracy never had to go after men. She always had a choice. She wasn't after Rick, and she wasn't after Manny either. Both men were there for her. She chose Rick because he looked nice and seemed kinder. When the judge made his decision, he handed them both 6 years apart. They were separated by 3 long hours and an unbreakable prison. Their only comfort was a 10-second hug twice a month. Lowering her eyes to the ground, she said, "You're right, Mom. I started all of this, and now I wish I could take it all back." For the first time that day, Martha looked at her daughter and felt sorry for her. She walked over, held Tracy's head to her chest, and hugged her as she had when Tracy was little. Just then, they heard the front door open. Tracy lifted her head and looked at her mom. Tracy stood up and walked around her mother. They both reached the living room at the same time. They saw Rick standing with his head down and his hands in his pockets. "Rick, sweetheart," said Tracy, her voice full of relief as she hurried to him. He pulled away from her, stepping back as if he was afraid to touch her. Looking straight at Martha, he said, "Miss James, thank you for letting me stay in your home. I know you don't really approve of me, but you helped me anyway. I'm grateful, but I can't stay here any longer. I don't want Anna to remember me as a bad man who hurt her mother. That's what I will become if I stay." Martha was surprised by how honest he was. She asked, "Where will you go?" Rick shrugged, looking sad. "Honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure how this will affect my parole, but I'm ready to take the chance if it means I won't become someone I don't want to be. I just want what's best for Anna, even if that means I won't be around." Then Martha really saw him. She saw the man Tracy had talked about. He was trying to change and be better. It wasn't a show. He wasn't doing it for attention or to score points. He was doing it for one reason only: Anna. He truly loved his family enough not to put them through this again. For the first time, Martha thought, maybe I was wrong about him. Instead of seeing a drug dealer, she saw a man who really wanted to be a better person. He just needed some help to get through this. Martha cleared her throat and said, "I don't think that's a good idea, Derek. You said it yourself. You don't know how this will affect your parole. If you're really trying to change, like you and my daughter keep saying, going back to prison won't prove anything. You need to do better for Anna and for everyone around you. You owe it to them." Rick nodded, but he still looked worried. He stared down at the ground, not wanting to face Tracy. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly, sounding lost. He seemed like a boy who couldn't find his way home. The police, the courtroom, and even prison hadn't changed him. But now he felt broken. Tracy wanted to run over and hug him. He needed her, but she couldn't be there for him right now, not when it mattered most. She felt stuck because she was part of why he was there. Martha walked over and gently lifted his chin so he would look at her. "You're going to sleep on the couch tonight, and tomorrow you will see your parole officer. Tell him you and Tracy are having problems and you need a new place to stay. I know there are temporary homes for people just out of prison, but you won't break your parole. You need to do the right thing, because Anna deserves a father who will be there for her. She needs you," Martha said firmly. "Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied quietly. Martha looked back at her daughter and gave her a disapproving look to make her quiet. Then she turned back to Rick. "Are you hungry? There's macaroni and cheese, chicken, and mixed vegetables in the kitchen." Rick nodded, and still avoiding Tracy's gaze, went to the kitchen for food. Tracy followed him, but Martha grabbed her arm to stop her. "Mom, let go. I have to talk to him." "No," she said, pointing a finger at Tracy. "Not today. You two will talk, but only after he finds a different place to stay." Tracy's face twisted in anger. "What? Are you serious? No way. He's not going anywhere. He's my husband, and he will stay here and work things out with me. I need to talk to him and tell him I love him." At that moment, Martha did something she had never done before. She slapped Tracy hard across the face. Tracy stared at her mother, shocked and hurt, holding her cheek. There was no sign of apology on Martha's face. Instead, she looked sternly at Tracy and said, "Do you know what he just did? He chose Anna." She pointed to Anna, who was sitting at the table playing with her food. "He's putting her first right now. He's choosing her over himself. What do you think he really wants to do with you in Manchester right now? Do you think he wants to stand here feeling small, like he's scared to speak? Of course not. You're not stopping him from being a father, but you need to give him space. For the first time, I understand. I see what you see. I see that he's trying to improve. But right now, he needs you to let him be free, because right now you're the only one holding him back. So let him go. When he's ready to talk, he will come to you. Do you get that?" Tracy wanted to keep fighting, but she knew her mother was right. So she slowly nodded and hugged her mom. Martha gently stroked Tracy's head and pulled her close, guiding her gaze toward the kitchen. She saw Rick sitting at the table with Anna. He leaned down and kissed her on the head before starting to eat. "I told you he was different," Tracy said playfully, as if she could read her mother's mind. Martha chuckled. "Be quiet, Tracy. No one likes a show-off. Moving on." Officer Giuliani sat back in his chair, watching Rick like he had done the day before. Part of him wanted to laugh at how silly everything seemed. Just yesterday, he had told Rick to keep a low profile to keep Miss James happy. Just yesterday, he had warned him to stay away from Manchester's kids. Just yesterday. But today was different, and life can be funny. At least Rick was here sharing his story. This chat could have happened in a jail cell because he had made a big mistake. That would have made the officer's job hard and would have frustrated him a lot. "You did the right thing by coming to me, Derek. Thanks for staying out of trouble. It helps that Miss James is here to back you up." With that, he nodded to Martha, who was sitting by Rick in front of his desk. She nodded back. Her being there was interesting. Yesterday, he thought that Rick and this woman weren't getting along well, and yet here she was, sitting close to him and looking for ways to help. If he wasn't wrong, it seemed like this woman really cared about Rick's future. Either something had changed between them since yesterday, or Rick had gotten it wrong about her not loving him. Either way, it made Rick look good. "Yes, I can help you find a place to live, but it will take some time. There's a waiting list. If this had been planned from the start, things would have been easier." "I understand," Rick said, though he looked worried. Officer Giuliani sighed. "Is there any way you can stay with Mrs. Morrison for now without making things worse?" Rick looked at Martha beside him and then down at the floor. His face said it all. He felt for the guy. Really, he felt for him. This was some really bad luck. Sadly, there weren't any great answers today, just choices that were a bit better than others. He leaned forward and said, "Listen, kid, the best thing you can do right now is to stay busy. Stay out of the house as much as you can. It would help if you had a job, so why not start there? Look for a job like your life depends on it. Find something that will keep you busy. In the meantime, I'll add you to a waiting list. When I find something, I'll call you. Okay?" Rick nodded. He stood up, reached out his hand, and said, "Thank you, Officer Giuliani." The officer shook Rick's hand, then he walked them both outside and waved as they got into Martha's car. "Good luck, kid," he mumbled as he put a cigarette in his mouth and lit it. It was rare for him to feel this way about a parolee so soon. After many years on the job and facing lots of disappointments, he was used to keeping his distance from them. It helped him stay focused and away from drinking, but sometimes he couldn't help it. He was only human after all. In the weeks that followed, Martha's house was weirdly quiet. It wasn't peaceful, though. There was a tension in the air, even if no one was fighting. The silence of ignoring each other felt worse than loud arguments. At least with noise, problems could be talked out instead of pushed aside. This cold silence was filled with a heavy presence. It felt like a shadow that hung over them, even when they were apart. Tracy felt the chill of its quiet anger. Life in Martha's house felt like that tense moment in a scary movie before something bad happens. Every little sound felt loud in the stillness. The pressure was on because you knew something could go wrong at any minute. This feeling kept Tracy on edge. To ease her pain, she decided to follow her mother's advice and let Rick have space. It was hard for her, slowly wearing away at her mind day after day. She couldn't stop thinking about what he might be feeling, which was like 1,000 tiny hurts. Not saying the monster's name made it scarier. Every morning she woke up alone in her bed while her husband slept in the next room. That felt much worse than when he was in jail. She had to bear him walking past her like she wasn't there. His eyes never met hers, looking right through her. But surprisingly, Rick got along better with everyone else. She saw him enjoy time with Anya, which filled her with mixed feelings of warmth and sadness. Even her mother, who used to dislike him, smiled when they talked. Tracy often saw the two of them together in the evenings at the kitchen table. They were busy filling out job applications and making resumes. Soon, she felt like a ghost. She could only watch what's happening around her, but she couldn't join in. Still, she followed what others wanted. It was good for Rick, good for Anya, and helped keep peace in the house. Who cared if it was bad for her? No one. Her heart hurt every day. This was her fault. Now her life was a mess. It wasn't going the way she had dreamed for the last 4 years. It felt like a nightmare, a wish gone wrong. She thought she'd gotten everything she wanted, but she felt left out. All she wanted was to enjoy the joy of having Rick back with her family. She wanted to laugh when he made Anya giggle and cry on his shoulder after a sad movie. Instead, her husband ignored her, slept on the couch, and made plans to leave without her. It was too much to bear. Every day she walked to work with sadness hanging over her. Every night she soaked her pillow with tears. Still, he listened to his mother's advice. It hurt her deeply. Days of silence turned into long weeks. Rick kept busy, always looking for a job. He went on early interviews and focused only on his plans and other things, but he knew he couldn't keep pretending Tracy wasn't there. Ignoring her took more energy than he had at night. He would stand outside her door and hear her cry herself to sleep. In the morning, he would walk past her, pretending not to see her swollen eyes. Part of him wanted to forgive her. He knew she felt bad. He wished he could just forget everything that happened. He probably would have done it if she had cheated with anyone other than that awful Manchester Childs. Rick wasn't the only one who saw how the silent treatment was affecting Tracy. Martha watched her daughter with worry as she moved around the house each morning, taking Anya to the babysitter and then heading to work each evening. No one spoke about the big problem. They all kept busy with Anya to avoid talking about it. One evening, a month later, Martha found Rick on the back porch looking up at the sky. He had a notebook, and he was writing in it. "Mind if I sit down?" she asked as she walked towards him. He was a bit startled, but then relaxed. "Not at all, Miss James. You can sit anywhere. This is your home." She sat next to him and said, "I was hoping you'd start to think of it as your home, too." Rick shrugged and looked into the distance, sadness on his face. "It's tough to think of him that way," he said. With everything happening, she nodded as if she understood. There were a lot of things she liked about her son-in-law. The most important was his honesty. Rick looked at Martha strangely, as if he wanted to ask something important. Finally, he said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" "I guess so," she replied. "But no offense if I don't want to answer." He thought for a moment and then asked, "Was there ever a Mr. James? I've known Tracy a long time, but you never mentioned her father." Martha took a deep breath, looking troubled. She thought about skipping the question, but finally said, "Let's just say her father was a very bad man." "Did he hurt you?" Rick asked. Martha looked away before nodding. For some reason, this made Rick feel angry. He wanted to protect her, even from memories of the past. Her eyes shone in the soft moonlight, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with her thumb. She did not want to cry for him anymore. She was finished with him. "I was 18 when I had Tracy. I barely knew who I was," she said, looking up at the stars. "I thought he was nice. He drove a nice car and wore good clothes. Other women wanted him, but for some reason he chose me. I felt so special. He bought me things, took me on dates, and told me I was his #1 woman." Her voice grew stronger as she shared her story. It was the first time she had told anyone about it. She had kept all those feelings hidden from the world and from Tracy. But the anger and hurt hadn't gone away. They just found a new target. "I let him treat me poorly, and it makes me sick to think about it. I did things for him that no one should do for anyone. But when I took a pregnancy test and learned I was going to be a mother, I knew I had to leave him. I couldn't let Tracy grow up with that monster. I had to choose between the man I loved and my baby, and I chose her," she said. "I understand," Rick nodded. There was silence for a moment before Martha spoke again. "Now it's my turn. I want to ask you something." "Sure," he replied. "What are your plans for my daughter?" Rick shifted a bit awkwardly, then jokingly asked, "What do you mean? Didn't you already ask me that? When I started dating her, she couldn't stop giggling?" And honestly, I didn't like that answer at all. But really, Rick sighed and shrugged a little. "I don't know. Do you still love her?" He groaned but nodded. "Listen," she said, leaning in closer. "My daughter doesn't always make the best choices. I know this Manchester thing is a mess, but she does love you. This silence you're keeping is hurting her. I'm not telling you to take her back or forgive her, but you can't keep punishing her like this. You need to talk to her. Let her know how you feel. Ignoring her is unfair, and it will only cause more pain. Anya." Anger bubbled up inside him, making him speak. "Miss James, no offense, but I can't do anything to her. Not even close to what she did to me. I'm sorry." He looked at her with regret. She nodded, and he went on. "She was with Manny the whole time while I was away, and I truly believe she didn't regret it. It wasn't a mistake for her. I think she wanted to be with him. I know he always wanted to be with her. Martha nodded but replied carefully. I don't think she went to him with the plan to cheat, at least not the first time. If I remember right, she said she got drunk in Manchester. Rick looked at her as if he didn't quite believe it. Miss James, I know your daughter. I see how she flirts and acts. She went to Marnie's house to get money for Anya, but she showed up in a short skirt and fishnets. Why would she dress like that if she just had to be there for a few minutes? Martha disliked that kind of thinking. Judging a girl by what she wore was wrong. It let guys off the hook for their bad choices. If she dressed that way, people assumed she wanted attention, right? But Rick wasn't finished. To make it worse, she cried about how much she missed me and how she needed to feel close to me. That's what she told him. Does it feel like a friendly visit when you show up at a guy's house at night in a short skirt? Or does it seem like an invitation? He had clearly thought about this for a while, maybe a month. He had connected the dots in his mind. Even Martha had to take a deep breath. So you think she planned this the whole time? Rick shrugged again. I don't know about that, but I know she left the house that night wanting to have fun. Do you think she did it because she doesn't love you? Shaking his head, he said, Love had nothing to do with it, Miss James. I think she just didn't expect me to find out. Well, that's true, she said to herself. But let's switch places, Derek. Imagine if she had to be away for 6 years and you had to take care of Anna. You're a good-looking guy. You'd probably meet some women. Rick smiled at this. Miss Robinson, are you trying to quiet me? They both laughed. It was nice to see him laugh, but Martha had more to say. If you had to be away from her for 6 years, wouldn't you want to find someone else for a while? If someone else had asked that, it wouldn't mean much. This kind of question didn't have a wrong answer. Rick could have said, no way, and no one could argue with that. But Rick took a moment to think and then said, I really don't know. I want to say I wouldn't, but I've never been in that place. I've never cheated on Tracy, he continued, but she's always been just a short drive away from me. Before Martha could enjoy her moment, Rick added, but I can't just be angry about what could happen in another world. Maybe in this world your daughter has hurt me badly. Does she still love me? Yes. Do I still love her? Sadly, yes. But it doesn't change the fact that every time I see her, I see him. I see the same faces he makes with other girls. I see her acting the same way with me. It's worse because they've spent so much time together that Anna feels more comfortable with him than with me. I see all of it, and I can't turn it off. This time he didn't apologize for his swear word. Martha didn't point it out either. She just put her hand on his knee and said, Then don't turn it off. Talk to her about it. Let her know how you feel and how much her actions hurt you. Stop trying to handle this alone and stop being scared to speak up. Just because you're angry doesn't make you the bad guy. If you tell her she's wrong, you won't lose your daughter. She brought this problem to you. It's only fair to give it back so you can both fix it. Rick didn't reply. He frowned and looked away. Martha noticed he was deep in thought. She could see he was considering it. Not wanting to stay too long, she stood up without a word, gave him a light pat on the shoulder, and walked back inside. Tracy saw her mother leave while sitting on the couch. Martha smiled at her and then went out the door. A moment later, Rick came in. When Tracy saw him, she looked at him with hope. Their eyes met for a moment, and her heart skipped a beat. Please tell me something, baby. Please. But he didn't say a word. He looked away and walked to the bathroom, looking sad. At that moment, she felt a mix of guilt and growing anger. Every time he ignored her or didn't pay attention, that anger turned into something more. It became resentment. He could sit outside laughing with her mom, who had not liked him before, but he had nothing for her. A month had passed and still nothing had changed. She picked up her phone and went back to playing her online poker game. She started to win. If he wanted to act this way, so be it. She thought, forget him. A tear filled her eye, but she held it back. Why should she cry for him if he was done with her? But she loved him deeply. That's why, despite her efforts, she couldn't stop the tears from falling. Get him up! Two big men stood over the man crumpled on the floor. Mo and Tuck, the two guys Manny trusted the most, grabbed the man by his arms and lifted him roughly to his feet. The man couldn't stand alone and needed their support. Please, Manny, the man said softly. It's not my fault. I would never rob you. You know me. Manny walked toward him steadily, using the baseball bat in his hand for support. It made a loud sound against the concrete, echoing in the empty warehouse. As he got closer, he leaned in and looked straight into the man's eyes. Then a smirk appeared on his face, almost friendly. He patted the man on the cheek. "Donnie? Donnie," he said, like he felt sorry for him. "Here we are, 4 guys who'd rather be anywhere else. I had other plans. Lisa bought that little red license plate, and guess what? She brought a friend along." "What?" exclaimed Mo, nearly dropping Donnie. "I know, right?" Manny said, happily tapping Mo on the shoulder, then turning back to Donnie as if they were just chatting. He continued, "I had no idea she liked girls, but honestly, I think she enjoys the drama of it all." "Please, Manny," Donnie pleaded. Manny ignored him and said, "You can guess why I'm not happy to see you. My guys probably had other things to do." He nodded at Mo and asked, "What about you, Mo? Got plans today?" What?" Tuck said, trying to hide his annoyance. "My name is Tuck," he added. "Mo is over there." But it didn't matter. He was just a hired hand. Manny could have named them anything. Turning back to Donnie, he spoke. "You've worked for me for what, 3 years now? I brought you on when my guy Rick went to jail. I thought you could handle this. You said I wouldn't regret giving you a chance. But ever since you took control, I've regretted it. 4 of my delivery drivers have been robbed. Somehow the robbers knew when and where to strike. You promised you would take care of this, and I let you. But now..." Manny stretched out his arms and looked around, holding the baseball bat. "Look, I know I messed up. I know you did, Manny, but I can make it right. Give me a couple of weeks, and I promise things will change. You know, I've known Rick for a long time. He's been like a brother to me since his dad passed away. We were close. He was the only one I trusted. Rick got things done when he was helping me. I never had any issues like this before. I never went into an empty warehouse without being safe. If someone tried to mess with me, Rick made sure they learned their lesson. Let's just say his lessons were unforgettable." 3 of the guys in the room laughed, like they were just having a good time. The only one not laughing was Donnie, who looked ready to panic. Manny said softly, "But for some reason, you just can't keep up. Donnie, my name is losing respect. People are starting to think I'm weak, that they can take what belongs to me. I can't let that happen." "Manny, please," Donnie said, sounding desperate. Manny took a few steps back and changed the topic, casually asking, "Do you like my shirt?" "What?" He pulled the bat off his shoulder and posed. "My shirt, the one I'm wearing. Do you like it?" Donnie, feeling awkward, said, "Yeah, I guess." Manny smiled and said, "I like it too. It cost almost $500, which is a lot of money for a shirt. I never thought I'd be able to spend that much." He laughed to himself and leaned against the wall. The other 3 men looked at him, confused about what was going on. To add to Donnie's fear, Manny smiled and said, after spending so much, it would be a shame to ruin it with blood. "So, Donnie, here's a problem you can help me solve." He finally looked at the shaking man. "Either you're the worst assistant I've ever had, or the best spy I've ever seen." "What? Come on, man. I'm not a spy." Grinning, Manny shrugged and said, "Then it's just you not doing your job. Okay, tell me who's working with you to steal from me. We can skip the training. But if you keep things from me, I won't work with you anymore." Manny lowered his head and shook it sadly. He sighed and said, "All right, I guess we'll work on my swing. Please, Manny, I'm your cousin. Let's move on," someone said. Manny threw the bat into the trunk of the car with a huff. He rolled his eyes and asked, "What?" "You said you were just going to scare him," his cousin reminded him. Manny hummed as he took off his gloves and tossed them in the trunk too. "That's what I did to Donnie," he said. But Mo looked confused and said slowly, "He was your cousin." Manny scoffed when he saw the fear on Mo's face. "See, that's weak. That's why you'll never be in charge. No one will take you seriously. You need to be tough like Stephen Curry if you want respect." The other guy, Tucker, saw a chance to speak up. "That's right, boss. You should be a superstar," he said smoothly. Manny shook his head and said, "No, you just need to be ready to take action whenever you can." Manny dug into the trunk and took the car keys from Donnie's pocket, tossing them to Mo. "You know what to do. Call the butcher and then pick up the car. Let me know when it's ready." Whatever Donnie had done, he didn't deserve all this. "Hey!" Tucker shouted, snapping his fingers. "Do you need a moment alone with him?" "No," Mo said, slamming the trunk shut. He walked to the driver's seat and yelled, "And my name is Mo, no one cares!" "Just do it," Manny said. As the car's taillights vanished around the corner, he pointed at Tucker. "You! Get your nose out of my business! Clean all this up and don't forget to use more bleach. I don't want to end up on that crime show." Tucker nodded and went to follow his orders. Manny leaned against the wall, feeling tired. He pressed his lips together and a frown crossed his face. "Damn it, Donnie. Why couldn't you just tell me who you were working with?" he thought as his hands started to shake. His feelings were getting out of control, and that was dangerous. Caring too much made people weak. Many bosses had found themselves in trouble due to their emotions. With so many wanting his spot, Manny couldn't show any weakness. Who cared if Donnie was family? He was just a problem. No matter if he was weak or not loyal, Donnie had to go. The fact that he was family only made things harder. People can't stab you in the back from a distance, they have to be close by. Manny had bigger worries. His main problem was that he had too many questions and no answers. How could $750,000 worth of drugs just vanish? Who had the skills to steal all that? Who would dare to take from him? Who did he need to deal with to make sure this didn't happen again? And most importantly, how was he going to pay back the Colombians? The thought of the Colombians waiting for their money sent a cold shiver down his back. The Sanchez family was well known for being tough. They were serious business people, and they used being tough as a way to run their business. They weren't just the best in the game, they stood above everyone like satellites in the sky. They didn't tolerate two things: late payments and weakness. They picked Manny as their distributor because he was as tough as they were. But now, Manny was close to showing them his weaknesses. If he couldn't find his product or get back at the people who stole from him, the Colombians would lose trust in him. If they lost trust, they would no longer need him. When they let someone go, they didn't send a nice message or a final paycheck. One idea was to deal with him in a very harsh way. Manny needed answers quickly. He had spent too much time in the batting cage with his cousin without getting anywhere. What should he do next? If only he had a good pitcher to step in for him. But there was no one but Rick. He thought back to when he had visited his old friend. Despite what he had said, he didn't go to see Rick just for a friendly visit. And it wasn't for Tracy either. No matter how pretty she was, there were always prettier girls out there. He had moved on as soon as she ended things. Manny really wanted to see if Rick would come back to the family. Things hadn't felt right since Donnie took over. The problem was everyone treated Donnie differently than they treated Rick. Rick had something special. They respected him and feared him, but Manny lost that respect when Rick left. Without respect, fear doesn't last. Forget Rick. He didn't need to be so sensitive. How could he let a girl come between them after all they had been through? He was about to end a friendship over a woman. Sure, Tracy was nice, but Manny could find someone much better for Rick in no time. If Rick wanted Tracy, he could have her. After all, she was single now. Why couldn't Rick see that Manny had actually helped him? Didn't he see that women like Tracy could easily pick up men, especially women with her looks and charm? It wouldn't be hard for someone rich and successful to sweep her off her feet. This guy would do everything he could to win her love. He would make sure she never left him and give her anything she wanted. How could Rick compete when he got out? He would be an ex-con with no job, no education, and no way to give her the life she had before. The guy who would take her away could do everything Rick was doing, but he would do it the right way. And with Tracy's mom cheering for him, Rick didn't even have a wife to return home to. Manny was not like the others. When it was time to step back, he didn't get mad. He didn't try to take Rick's wife away or make her decide between them. He saw the situation for what it really was. He was just someone to talk to when she felt lonely, a warm body to sit with when she needed comfort. That was his place, and he stuck with it. In his mind, it was better for him to be the one waiting in the wings, not another guy. He thought, "You're welcome, Rick." But Rick didn't see it that way. He didn't like it when Manny helped out. It was a tough job, but Manny did it without any complaints. Sometimes he even felt like a good person. Plus, Rick forgot about his own life. He was happy to take money from Manny. His child was taken care of with the same money. But all Rick saw was pain and betrayal. He was acting weak and sad. Why does Rick keep pretending he's still the same? He's not. He's changed. And right now, Manny needed a strong friend. How could he reach the old Rick? Not this lost and gloomy person. An idea suddenly came to him. He looked at his watch and nodded. Maybe he should go to Walmart. They often claim to have everything a man might need. It could be they had a solution to his problem too. Manny put on his shirt, buttoning it up. He groaned when he realized he had stained it with blood. Most likely it was from Donnie. Now, his favorite shirt was ruined and could get him in trouble. He had to burn it. Why did things like this keep happening? He was just a businessman trying to find his way to success. In the next scene, Tracy blew a big pink bubble with her gum, then sucked it back in and popped it a few times. When the sound stopped being fun, she made another bubble. "Next customer," she said in a fake professional voice, trying to hide her annoyance. Money transfers, Western Union. Silly questions. People were complaining about long lines. This was her day. This was her job. One good thing about working in customer service was the view from her station. She could see everything happening in the store. She watched who came in and out, who was stealing, and which cashier was being lazy. So when she looked up, she gasped in surprise and fear. Manchester Childs walked into the store. You could hear the sharp intake of breath as all the women turned to look at the entrance. The atmosphere in the store changed when Manny walked in, moving like a star on the red carpet. He was confident, and everyone could see it. As soon as he spotted Tracy, he didn't try to hide why he was there. He didn't come to shop. He headed straight to her table, leaving a strong scent behind. "I'm next," he told the guy in front of him, who looked ready to argue. Manny held his gaze and added, "Don't let this end badly in front of your girlfriend." The guy looked unsure, glancing from Manny to his girlfriend, trying to make sense of the situation. What he didn't realize was that he was already losing because he hesitated. With each moment that passed, his girlfriend lost more respect for him. Finally, the guy gave up and looked down at the ground. Manny thought to himself, "There are so many weak people in the world." He then noticed the girlfriend looking at him and he winked. She smiled back just as Tracy finished with the customer before her. Manny didn't wait. He walked right up to her with a playful smile. "Hi, Trace, can I help you?" Tracy said in her usual tone, treating him like all the other customers. "Yes, you can help me in many ways. Take a break so we can chat," he replied with a smirk. Still focused on her job, Tracy asked, "Do you need to send money, receive money, or get a money order?" He maintained eye contact as if daring her to ignore him. Leaning his elbows on the counter, he said, "I definitely need to get money, but not from Western Union." Tracy sighed, showing her annoyance. "Manny, I'm at work. You're blocking the line. What do you need?" Manny glanced back at the impatient people waiting, then turned his attention back to Tracy. "You're not listening. I already told you what I want. I need you to take a break so we can talk." Tracy leaned in, gritting her teeth as she whispered angrily, "We're not talking anymore. That's enough." Manny raised his hand, trying to calm her down. "Seriously? That's not why I'm here. I really need to talk to you." He added playfully, "Well, besides you telling me how great I am." "That's enough," Tracy interrupted, raising her voice. "I'm on a 15-minute break. Can you cover for me until I get back?" Sylvia, the co-worker, looked between them with surprise, but she nodded. "Sure, girl." Tracy marched angrily around the table, past Manny, and stormed out of the store. She didn't even look back to see if he was following her. As she left, Manny pulled out his phone and handed it to the girl who was in line, completely ignoring the guy standing next to her. He said, "Put your number in here. I'll be back for it." With that, he walked right past her upset boyfriend, as if he didn't care at all. When he stepped outside, Tracy was waiting for him. It was clear she was not going to let him off easy. She came up to him and shouted, "What do you want me to do, Manny? Get a divorce?" Manny just smiled and shook his head. "I guess Rick is still upset with us," he replied. No, Manny. It's not us. It's you and me. We are two people who shouldn't have gotten involved," she said, clearly frustrated. With a knowing smile, Manny added, "You're not really mad because we were together. You're mad because your husband found out." Tracy pushed him hard on the chest, but he barely moved. "Yes, I am mad. I'm angry about all of this. My life is a mess and you think it's funny? I thought you were my friend." For the first time, the smile faded from Manny's face. He looked serious and nodded, showing he understood. The truth was, he liked Tracy. He enjoyed spending time with her. She made him laugh, which didn't happen often. He envied Rick for having a girl like her. Manny knew he could find a prettier girl, but he would never find one he trusted like Rick trusted Tracy. "I messed up, Trace. You're right. I was being a jerk. I'm sorry you're going through all this," he said, his tone genuine. Tracy crossed her arms and turned away. "If he finds out you're coming to my work, it'll make things worse. He hardly notices me as it is." Then, looking back at him with curiosity, she asked, "Why are you here?" "I need your help with Rick. You need to help him forget all of this," Manny said. Tracy narrowed her eyes at him, not fully convinced. "Why do you care so much about how he feels? You haven't even tried to call him since you two fought." "I wanted to give him some space. You know how he is," Manny replied. Tracy nodded, understanding. She knew how stubborn Rick could be. Feeling a bit caught, Manny gave her an innocent look and added, "I just miss my friend, that's all." "But I miss him too," she said, looking sad as she stared at the ground. Encouraged by their talk, Manny asked, "Isn't there anything you can do to help fix this? I know you have charms that can soften him up." But with that comment, he may have gone too far. Tracy stared at him in shock and pushed him again. "You can't talk to me like that or look at me like you do." That was probably what made him suspicious at first. The way he looked at her was like a kid looks at candy. Manny couldn't help but lick his lips. He was curious about what she tasted like, and he imagined she was sweet. She pointed at him and said, "See that? Look right there." Manny let out a groan but raised his hands, showing he was giving up. Okay, you're right, I'll work on it." She crossed her arms and looked at him with disbelief. She didn't trust his talk about missing his friend. He was up to something. "Maybe you should give Rick and me some privacy. Hopefully, he and I can sort this out. If we do, maybe he can forgive you both after a while." Manny frowned. This plan felt really slow to him. He didn't have time to wait for Rick. He needed answers now. "I get you, Tracy, I really do, but this isn't working for me. I need you to make your man understand a little faster. I can't get him to forgive me, let alone you." Manny lowered his voice and said, "Sure you can." He tried to seem relaxed, but there was urgency in his eyes and voice that made Tracy uneasy. He wasn't just suggesting, he was almost commanding. The only thing that got Manny serious was money, and when he didn't get any, he could become very dangerous. He didn't just need his friend Rick, he needed Rick, the dangerous one. A chill ran down Tracy's spine, making her wince. She had seen Manny bully others, but it was different being on the other side. She did not want to involve her husband again, not again. She had already lost him once because of his life choices. Last time, she enjoyed the benefits of his easy money, but now that she understood the true cost of those fancy gifts, she wanted no part of it. She would rather be poor than lose Rick again. She had to get Manny to leave. "Okay," she said in a shaky voice. "If I can get him to talk to me, I'll see what he thinks about you." "Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it." She tried to step back, but he grabbed her arm and pulled her close. His grip was tight, almost painful. Looking into her worried eyes, he said, "I believe in you. I know you can do this if you really want to. Don't let me down." She pulled her hand away and hurried back to the store. Dark thoughts filled Manny's mind, but he pushed them aside. He felt time closing in on him. For all their sakes, Tracy better be able to get through to her man. If she couldn't, Manny might have to come up with a different plan, as much as he wanted to use these ideas on his girlfriend. He had no choice now. Just as he was about to go to his car, the girl he had lent his phone to walked in through the sliding doors. He had completely forgotten about her, but he greeted her with a friendly smile. He said, "There you are, pretty girl. I thought I was going to have to chase you for my phone back." She looked at him and handed over the phone. He took it and saw that Cheryl had done what he asked. He really needed a good distraction from the tough day he'd had, so he asked her, "Are you busy right now?" She shook her head. He got his keys from his pocket and pressed the button to unlock his BMW. It beeped and its lights flashed. She seemed impressed. In another part of the day, Tracy walked wearily into the house and shut the door behind her. She sighed, trying to forget her worries. You might think she was just tired from work, but she was facing bigger problems. She stopped when she saw her husband sitting on the couch with Anna. They both looked cozy. But what caught Tracy's eye was what they were doing. He was reading Anna's book, finally getting to touch something that was very special to her. He was now really part of the family. He was a dad. Tracy felt tears welling up. Why couldn't she enjoy this moment? Why did it have to feel ruined? When Anya saw her mom, she quickly jumped off her dad's lap and ran across the room. Tracy wiped her tearful face and smiled when she saw her little girl. Anya had a way of making people feel better. Tracy happily picked up her excited daughter. "Hi," she said. For a moment, she forgot about rude customers, pushy bosses, and her judgmental co-workers, but her little break didn't last long. When she looked at her husband, reality hit hard. He stared at her for a moment, then looked away, trying to talk to someone else. Tracy asked hopefully, "How did you get Anya away from the babysitter?" He replied firmly, "I'm her dad. I had no interviews today and I needed a break from looking for jobs, so I came to pick her up." At least he was talking to her. It felt nice to hear his voice again. She said as kindly as she could, "Thank you. You saved me a trip." He just hummed in reply, and just like that, tension returned. "Really, Rick? Still?" she said with frustration. The air between them was quiet and awkward. She stood there, hoping he would say something. Anything, really. "I love you," or "I can't stand you," or even just something funny. But he stayed silent, just like he had for the past month. He sat there with a serious face, staring at something interesting on the wall. "You know what? Forget this," she said, angry. Instead of holding Anya, she gently placed her on the floor. The little girl quickly ran back to the lap she had just left so her dad could finish his book. Tracy, eyes bright with anger, hurried to her bedroom. She grabbed the doorknob but didn't turn it. She stopped, seeming unsure. Looking back at the living room, she said, "By the way, Manny showed up at my work." Rick's eyes filled with anger. She laughed in disbelief. "Oh, now you want to pay attention to me? Now that I mentioned Manny, I'm finally important." His eyes drooped again. He grumbled and shook his head. "I bet that was a good time. Did you enjoy being with your boyfriend?" he said sharply. Tracy walked back into the living room. Her voice shook with excitement as she replied, "No, it wasn't fun, jerk. It was scary. He didn't come to see me. He was asking about you." Now she truly had his attention. He sat down on the couch next to her and stood up again. "What did he want?" he asked, now really looking at her. She looked scared and he could see it on her face. Whatever Manny had said or done, it had shaken her up. Tracy rubbed the spot where Manny had grabbed her. She thought she could still feel his fingers on her skin. "He wanted me to get you to forgive him." "Why?" he asked with a sneer. Throwing her hands up, she exclaimed, "I don't know, Rick, but he didn't say I had a choice." Rick's worry grew and he asked, "What do you mean?" Tracy wrapped her arms around herself and shook her head, as if trying to shake off what he had left behind. "He wasn't asking me. He was telling me, almost forcing me to make you talk to him." She struggled to explain how he made her feel, not that he cared. So she sighed and threw her hands up again, saying, "You know what? Forget it." She turned to leave, but just like with Manny, Rick grabbed her arm to stop her. But unlike Manny, Rick's grip was soft and gentle, showing the big difference between the two men. "Did he threaten you?" His eyes were full of real concern. Tracy shook her head and wiped her nose. Not exactly like that, but Rick nodded. Manny didn't need to say threats. People just knew what he meant without words. Even with his anger at her, he was still her husband. His love made him protect her without thinking. He would never hurt her or let anyone else do so. With a determined look, he held her shoulders and pulled her close, hugging her tightly against his chest. She closed her eyes and let out a deep breath. Suddenly, all the feelings he was holding came pouring out of her as hot tears. She leaned against her husband and cried. "Don't cry, Mommy," Anya said as she jumped off the couch and ran over to her. As Daddy held Mommy close, Anya hugged Mommy's leg. "Daddy and I are going to help you feel better," she said. But this only made Mommy cry harder. The heavy sobs shook her body. She wanted to hold on to Daddy for support. "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." She kept saying this between sobs. Daddy didn't say anything. He couldn't. He needed to put up a wall between himself and the pain. Just because he wanted to protect her didn't mean he wanted to betray her. Maybe it was time to talk about what was wrong, but maybe that time was gone. He needed to wait. He had more urgent things to think about now. Rick had made a promise about Tracy and Anya. Everyone looked up to Rick. He was known as a man who kept his word. He didn't want to break promises, even if they came across as threats. He rested his chin on her head and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll handle it. Manny won't bother you anymore." When he said that, Mommy stopped crying and pulled away from him. She understood his tone. She knew what that tone meant. "No, no!" she shouted, poking him in the chest. "You won't do what I think you're going to do." In a calm but serious voice, he replied, "I'm just going to talk to Mr. Childs about how he threatened my wife." "And what will you say to him?" she asked, seeing the determination in his eyes. "I'll say enough to make him understand." Oh no, he was thinking of hurting him. Panic hit Tracy. She couldn't lose him again. If he went back to prison, especially for hurting someone, 4 years would feel like nothing compared to what he could face there. She had to find a way to calm him down. Softening her voice, she looked him in the eyes. "Rick, please stay away from Manny. He's not worth it. You're doing so well. You're looking for a job, being a great dad to Anya and staying out of trouble. But Manny..." She paused, trying to find the right words. She didn't want to make him feel weak or angry. Finally, she said, "Manny is still a bad influence, even if you don't like him. He knows how to get you to do what he wants." He let go of her and turned away, a low growl escaping his throat. He didn't like what she said about how she saw him. "He's not smarter than me," he said. Tracy quickly replied, "I'm not saying that, but you get lost when he's around. He will use it against you." Just then, Martha walked in. She had just come home from work, too. Feeling the warm air in the room, she turned to her granddaughter, Anya. "Sweetie, let's go to the store for ice cream. Is there anything else that sounds good?" As Martha put on her coat, Tracy looked at her mother. They silently thanked each other for all the little moments they had shared. Then Martha spoke up. "It seems the store down the street is out of ice cream, so I will need to drive across town. We might be a bit late." She took Anya's hand and led her out the door. For the first time in ages, Rick and Tracy found themselves alone. "Rick, please tell me you didn't kiss Manny," she said. He suddenly interrupted her. "No, that wasn't it." Tracy felt like her world had turned upside down. She couldn't find her voice. "What?" Rick didn't want to talk about it now, but he couldn't wait any longer. The questions that had been on his mind burst out. He stepped closer to her, not in a threatening way, just with determination. As he got closer, she saw real hurt in his shining eyes. It was so deep she almost forgot everything else. "When you went to Manny's house that first night, did you mean to get close?" That question hit her hard. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her. She knew her husband well. Trust meant everything to him. She had failed at being loyal. If she lied now, she would lose his trust forever. There would be no fixing things after that. She couldn't look at him. His eyes were full of pain, and telling him the truth would only add to it. But she promised herself that if he spoke again, she wouldn't lie. She lowered her gaze, nodded, and said, "Yes." After a moment to catch her breath, he asked, "Did you enjoy it?" Another nod. "Yes." Anger flashed in his eyes. He already suspected the truth before he asked. He had spent countless hours going over that night with Manny in his mind. Still, hearing that simple word made him feel overwhelmed. Emotions rushed through him. He pointed them at her, letting them out. "How could you be interested in someone like him? He's a bad person, but you wanted him. Why? How?" Tracy struggled to find the right words. It's not about the money." But he interrupted her again, anger spilling from his words. "Is it the money? Is that what caught your eye? That's what the other women see in him. The cars, the clothes, the shiny things. They don't care about anything else. But you're not like that. Please tell me you're not one of them." "No, it's not like that at all," she insisted. "But what was it? I need to know. I have to make sense of this. If not, it's really driving me crazy because I was so mad at you," she finally yelled out, unable to hold back her feelings. Suddenly, her lovely face changed. Lines appeared on her forehead. Her eyes looked narrow. Pain mixed with anger in her strong, steady voice, but she wasn't shouting. She asked, "How could you leave me like this? You left me, Rick. You were gone for 6 years after you promised to always be with me." "I had no choice," he replied. "Yes, you did!" she yelled, pointing her finger at his chest. Surprised by her shout, he stepped back, but she moved closer. The space between them disappeared. Filled with anger and hurt, she said, "You can't act like the victim here. Don't even try. You weren't kidnapped, Rick. You were arrested. They handcuffed you, put you in a police car, and took you away for what you did. You were found guilty in court for the things you did. You got 6 years in prison for your choices. So don't stand there and say you had no choice." This time, Rick was speechless. He couldn't come up with a good answer to what she said. Her silence just made her more determined. "No. Do you know what it's like to see them take everything from me? The house, the cars, the clothes. You? I was left with nothing and no one. But I'm still here waiting for you, because my world starts where you are. After all this, after everything, you had a second chance to come back to me and Anya. All you had to do was tell them the truth about Manny. I could live without money and a house, but not without you. I needed you. So what did you do?" She threw her hands up in frustration. "You chose to leave us unsafe. You knew how long they tried to keep you away from us so you could protect him." A wave of hidden pain washed over her. She had held it in for so long. She wanted to be strong for Rick because she knew prison was tough for him. She didn't want him to see how much he had hurt her, how much he had embarrassed her. But those feelings wouldn't go away, no matter how hard she tried to ignore them. Ironically, the more she kept quiet, the stronger they became. She crossed her arms and hugged herself. Tears filled her eyes. All she could do was look away and try to hold herself together. Rick wanted to argue. He wanted to say something, but even with the anger bubbling inside him, he knew she was right. He realized that if he had made a different choice, things would have been different. He wouldn't have left, and they could have led ordinary lives. But his wife was missing one important thing. It was about her choice, too. "You chose me, Tracy," he said, looking right at her. There was no anger in his voice, just honest determination. I never lied to you. I told you who I really was. The expensive gifts I gave you came from somewhere you knew about. I often left you in the middle of the night and came back with bloodied clothes that I had to burn. You never asked me about it because you knew you were with me because you wanted to be. You knew what I did and still chose to be with me, even when I might go to jail. So you can't act like the victim." Tracy looked like she wanted to argue, but then she went quiet. A memory of her mother came back to her. Her mother used to say this again and again. Now she realized that her mother was right. None of them were victims, especially not when it came to guilt. Their futures depended on the choices they made, but it all began with their own fights. Fatigue washed over both of them. Silence filled the room as they were lost in their thoughts. Tracy stared straight ahead as if she wasn't really seeing him. He stared at the floor. Finally, Tracy broke the silence with a sigh. "You know what, Rick? You're right. I have blamed you for my shame for a long time, but really my own choices led me here. I chose to stand by you no matter what anyone said in court. That was my choice, and now I have to live with it." She looked him in the eyes, with a strong look like she was taking charge of her life. Rick felt his heart race. He feared she would leave him. He thought he had pushed her too far. Just as he felt the cold panic in his chest, her eyes softened. She reached out and took his hand gently. "I would choose you again. I will always choose you because I can't imagine life without you. Not even Manny or my mother being broke can change that. No matter how many times I need to choose you, I will always choose you, even when you don't choose me." She stood there looking sad and then added, "But I hope you will choose me too." With that, she left the room. Rick sat in the chair for what felt like hours. Thoughts and feelings clashed inside him. Tracy's words hit him hard. "Pick me." She was right. He hadn't picked her. He picked his life on the street over her. He decided to keep his reputation, not wanting to be called a snitch, no matter the price. That cost him his wife and kid. Manny was like a brother to him, but his real family was the woman in the courtroom who cried as the police took him away. The pain in her eyes hurt more than anything else. Rick felt he owed a lot to the man who took care of his money, but really, he owed more to the woman who had begged his mom for a car so she could drive 3 hours to see her husband. Money was easy for someone like Manny, but love and time were special. That was what Tracy had given him. It was her choice to give that to him. Part of Rick thought he should forgive her. The other part felt he had every right to never talk to her again. He had so many questions and felt so much hurt he didn't know how to deal with. His mind was full of memories he wanted to forget. If he could forget, he might be able to forgive her. But that wasn't the point right now. It was about choices. Rick got up from his chair and walked over to Tracy's room. He half expected the door to be locked, but it wasn't. The doorknob turned easily, like it wanted him to come in. He opened the door and saw Tracy lying in bed, facing him. She was curled up in a ball. Rick heard her sniffing. He stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. The bed creaked under his weight. Tracy still stayed curled up, sensing he was there. He put his hand on her leg. Her hand moved next to his and rested on top of it, but she didn't move. With a heavy sigh, Rick said, "I have so many questions, Tracy. I wish I could just forgive you. I know I should, but there's a lot bothering me." She didn't answer him, at least not in a clear way. Her voice was tired as she said, "I'm just really tired, Rick." He understood she wasn't just talking about sleep. He nodded sadly. He felt tired as well. Her hand held tightly to his arm. At the same time, she pulled him closer, knowing what she wanted. He decided to give in. He lay down behind her and pressed his whole body against hers. She wrapped her arm around his waist. It felt nice. It felt right. After a while, he finally broke the quiet and said, "I choose you, Tracy, but I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet." She took his hand to her lips and kissed the back of it. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "That's a start, I agree." There were still many questions in his mind and many worries, but like she said, he was tired. They would talk about everything later. Now he just needed to hold her. In the next moment, Rick felt a tap on his shoulder. He woke up with a start and saw his mother-in-law looking at him. Sleeping next to him was Tracy. He hadn't even realized he had fallen asleep. Wow, he was really tired. "Hi, Martha. How are you?" he asked, his voice still sleepy. Martha had to hide a smile as she looked at the two of them. Everything in her house looked fine, so she figured their talk had gone normally. But that didn't matter to her right now. Something odd was happening with her son-in-law. A woman was in the living room asking for him. "Who is it?" he asked, looking confused. "You should go outside and talk to her yourself," she replied. Rick stood up and walked into the living room. There on the couch sat a woman he recognized from a long time ago. "Cynthia," he said quietly. As soon as she saw him, she jumped up, ran over, and hugged him tightly. Tears filled her eyes. "Rick," she said with a shaky voice, "please, we need to talk." "What is going on?" thought Melanie, waking up from a nice dream. She was puzzled. Who was this woman? This wasn't his girlfriend, Lisa. Vague memories of yesterday came back to him. He remembered the batting cage and going to Walmart to talk with Tracy about getting Rick to join the program. What was her name? Oh, Cheryl. That was quite a surprise to run into her at Walmart. After taking Cheryl back to his place, he started mixing drinks. The drinks worked like magic. Cheryl started to relax and open up. But as they drank more, his memory got fuzzy. Lifting the blanket, he peeked underneath to see if his friend was really there. Bits and pieces of memories returned. It was clear he had a fun night. Then he heard a buzzing noise pulling him from his thoughts. It was his cell phone. He reached for the phone on the nightstand, wondering who was calling him at 2:48 in the morning. He thought it might be Lisa, asking where he was since he hadn't talked to her all day. When he picked up the phone, he was surprised to hear it wasn't Lisa. It was another woman with a cheerful voice. "Hi, Tracy," he said sleepily. "I didn't expect you to call so soon. Do you have good news? Maybe Rick and I can make up." There was a long silence. Marnie wondered if she had dialed the wrong number. Then a deep voice replied, "Not Tracy, it's time. I'll meet you at your warehouse. Come alone. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The call ended with a click. "Oh no, Derek," Marnie thought as her heart raced. Sweat began to bead on her forehead. Was he nervous? Why was he nervous? This was what he wanted, a chance to meet. It seemed his visit to his ex had worked. But Derek was unpredictable. What side of Derek would show up? Would he see the friendly wolf or the sad puppy he pretended to be? Marnie already knew the answer. After all, he had threatened the man's wife. Making up was nowhere on the list of things to do. Rick showing up was good news. Rick could handle anything. There wasn't a man alive who could scare Marnie. But just in case, he needed extra help. Marnie picked up the phone again and dialed. When Mo answered, she said, "Hey Mo, guess who just called me? What time is it?" Mo yawned and replied, "It's showtime." "I just got a call from Rick. He wants to meet at the warehouse. I need you to wake up and drive there, and take Duck with you." There was a pause before Mo groaned. "Marnie, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning." "So?" she replied. "After I helped Donnie with his car last night, we cleaned the warehouse until late. What's your point?" He lowered his voice and added, "Come on, man. My girlfriend is here." Marnie sat up in bed and looked ahead, saying sharply, "Mo, what does that have to do with what I just asked you? Get over there, now!" Mo sighed and said, "All right, I'll be there in about 45 minutes. 30. "We both know it won't take that long," Marnie said and hung up. Anger surged in him, leaving a bad taste in his mouth. Damn helpers. Maybe it was time to fire them all and start fresh. Since when did people forget who he was? First, Donnie stole from him, and now his men felt brave enough to question his orders. The Colombians would not be happy to see this. When Manny pulled up at the house, Mo and Tucker were already waiting. Their headlights lit up the dark area in front of them. Manny looked around for Rick but only saw his team. He switched off the engine and got out of the car. Mo and Tuck followed him. The three men stood by their cars looking around. "Do you see him?" Manny asked, trying to hide his nerves. "No," Mo replied. "Are you sure? He said he'd be here." "Oh, he's here." Manny tried to smile, hiding his growing anxiety. Then he shouted, "Are you here, Ricky?" Silence fell over them. Only the crickets answered. Manny felt uneasy. He didn't know what Rick was up to, but it wouldn't be good to make Tracy a widow tonight. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. "Yeah, I'm here." As they turned around, they saw Rick step out of the shadows and walk towards them. Manny glanced at Rick, trying to spot any signs of trickery. In a half-joking tone, Manny asked, "What's going on? Are you Batman now?" Rick ignored Manny's joke and said, "I see you didn't come alone like I asked. Looks like you needed the cheerleader for support." Then, tilting his head with a small grin, he added, "Are you scared of me, Manny?" Manny acted like he didn't notice Rick's gaze. Instead, he laughed a little too loud, trying to hide how nervous he felt, his heart racing like a horse. He gripped the gun on his belt even tighter. "Don't get too full of yourself. Your brave act works on everyone else, but not on me." Rick caught the tightness in Manny's voice and how he tried to keep some space between them. Rick was making him uneasy, and they both knew it. "Good, right?" Rick said, walking towards the warehouse and turning his back on them. Then he mocked, "And they were with you when all your stuff got stolen." That made all three men stop. They looked at each other, confused, then back at Rick. How did he know about this? Manny's eyes narrowed, full of suspicion. In a flash, his hand wasn't on the gun anymore. Instead, he pulled it out and aimed it right at the back of Rick's head. Rick turned calmly, as if he was expecting the gun. "No, I didn't take your stuff," Rick said, clearly annoyed. He sounded like it was silly to even think otherwise. Manny studied him for a moment, but Rick only showed a calm face, almost brushing off the gun like it was nothing. Rick turned away and faced the warehouse again. He stood at the door, looking bored, waiting for one of them to open it. "How do you know about all this?" Manny asked, still aiming the gun. He looked at Mo and nodded for him to open the door. If there was going to be trouble, Manny wanted it inside where he could control it. When the door opened, all three of them stepped inside before Manny locked it behind them. Only then did he relax a little, though he still kept the gun pointed at Rick. Here, in this place, Rick felt powerful. He decided who lived and who didn't. Entering the warehouse felt like stepping back in time. It had been years since Manny had seen it. It was like going to a reunion, with old memories mixing with new ones. Rick looked around with a sense of nostalgia. Manny cleared his throat, trying to get Rick's attention. "Answer my question, man," he said, tapping his fingers on the gun. Rick looked up, laughed a little, and replied, "Everyone knows you got robbed, you know that. You can't hide something like this. The word is out on the streets." With a smirk, he asked, "Do the Colombians know about it yet?" Manny didn't respond, but he didn't have to. It was a question that didn't need an answer. They both knew how things went. The Sanchez family had eyes everywhere. They could find out anything. For Manny, time felt borrowed from a dangerous loan shark. He looked worried, but he tried to act tough. Rick glanced at his two followers. They stood there trying to look strong and scary. It reminded Rick of when he had been in prison. Those guys were just petty criminals, robbing small stores. How they got mixed up with Manny was a mystery. They seemed tough, but truthfully, they were not very bright. They were so clueless that they didn't even realize how much trouble they were in. When the Sanchez family wanted revenge, they took everything down. If these two henchmen understood what was coming, they would look as scared as Manny did. Rick asked casually, "Where's Donnie?" Both followers turned to Manny with blank faces. Rick looked around the room and noticed something that made him lose his cool. "Oh my God, you're kidding me! Please tell me you didn't kill your own cousin!" The silence made him rub his forehead in frustration. Of course, Manny had killed Donnie. He needed someone to blame, and we all know that the one left to take the fall is usually the first one offered up. At least say you're sure he was the one who robbed you. Say he told you where to find your stuff. And for heaven's sake, tell me you didn't do something crazy like beating him up. Manny's eyes were wide open, staring blankly. "How do you people survive without me?" Rick said, finding humor in his own question. Manny wanted to silence Rick. The two followers looked ready to spill secrets, and Manny had no intention of getting involved in that mess. He had a lot of knowledge about the situation, and narrowing his eyes, he said, "Unbutton your shirt." Rick just laughed. "What? You think I'm hiding a wire?" Mo and Tuck were beginning to understand the tension in the room. With serious and cautious eyes, the three men lifted their guns and pointed them at Rick. Manny, without a trace of a smile, said again, "Open up." The tension in the room grew stronger. With each moment, it felt like a small move or sound could make everything turn dangerous. Rick looked at the three of them with anger. "Come on, I'm not a rat, you know that." Manny only gave a slight smirk and hummed without meaning it. He and his guys kept their aim steady, and instead of getting mad, he decided to have some fun. He joked around by taking off his shirt as if he was at a party. He waved it over his head and tossed it to the floor, but even that couldn't lighten the heavy mood. Manny kept his face serious and full of anger. He was ready to hurt someone again if he had to. He told his men to check Rick. They put their guns away and walked over to him, and Rick didn't resist. He just stood there with his arms out while they searched him. When they finished, Tucker said, "He's clean." Rick shook his head and asked sarcastically, "Does that excite you? Are you sure you don't want to really go for it?" Finally, Manny lowered his gun but still held it tight in his hand. He asked, "Did you come all this way to see this place, or do you need something else?" Rick frowned and said, "Honestly, I wanted to hit you for what you did with my wife yesterday, but you didn't bring anyone like I asked." Manny smiled and chuckled. It was the first thing Rick said that Manny really believed. "Well, don't let Tuck and Mo stop you," he said with a grin. "They won't," Rick replied. "Actually, it was Tracy who talked me out of it. She doesn't want me to go back to jail because of you. I'm sure there isn't a cop who wouldn't cheer for me if I took you out." Manny felt a wave of memories hit him. He actually missed Rick. Rick's boldness and belief that three armed men couldn't hold him back were both funny and impressive. Manny put his gun away, looking amused. "You'd be surprised," he said. "Half of them work for me or come here often." Rick shook his head, clearly upset. "Are there any good cops?" he asked. "Sure, but they're probably off in Narnia, riding unicorns and chasing leprechauns." For the first time since things got tense, they both laughed. In that moment, Rick nearly forgot his anger towards Manny. Just for a second, the friend he once knew came back. Manny was like a catchy song. His fun and relaxed personality could stick in your mind, even if you didn't want it to. You could dislike him completely and still find yourself humming his tune for hours. Rick's frown at Manny softened a little. He said, "I need to cut you out of my life for good." "What do you mean?" Manny asked. "I mean, you've been my best friend," Rick replied. "Honestly, I don't think anyone will ever be as close to me as you." Manny nodded. He felt the same, but with a sigh of sadness. Rick went on, "You don't see how harmful you are to those around you. Look how you treat the people who care about you. You entertained my wife while I was away. You pushed her to do what you wanted. You even hurt Donnie. To be honest, bro, you're not a nice guy." Manny usually didn't care about feelings, his or anyone else's. Emotions were annoying. They made people weak, and weakness was the enemy. But Rick's words stung more than they should have. Manny's face twisted into a smirk. Turning to the other two in the room, he said, "Watch this, boys. Tonight's going to be fun. Pastor Derek Morrison is here to teach us how to be better people." The other two laughed, catching the joke. Mo asked, "Boss, isn't this the guy who held Tommy up on the bridge to get info on the new team moving into your area?" "Yep, that's him," Manny replied. Tucker didn't give up, saying, "Didn't he put Vinny in the hospital for 2 weeks? I saw him limping the other day. He hasn't been the same since." Nodding with a grin, Manny agreed, "Damn, Mo. You're right. He used to do that too." Everyone but Manny noticed he was mixing up his stories. This time, they just let it go. There was no point in correcting him. Turning to Rick, Manny grinned and said, "You know, Pastor, I don't think you're the one who should be giving us lessons. You don't seem very nice either." Rick laughed softly and nodded. He had known Manny long enough not to let his words hurt him. In a calm voice, he replied, "I never said I was innocent. I never claimed to be a good guy. But at least the people who love me get love in return." "Yeah, and look what that got you," Manny shot back, his words igniting anger in Rick's eyes. Manny had no right to say that. Rick, no longer calm, said, "Tell me what needs to happen for you to be out of my life forever." "Now we're talking," Manny thought, stepping closer. A calm and collected Rick made him uneasy. For Manny, an angry Rick was easier to handle. In a cool voice, Rick said, "It's simple. You're going to help me find the men who did this to me. Make them pay and get the money I owe the Colombians. If you can do that, I will leave you. I will also give you enough money to start fresh. No more dead-end jobs. No more living with your mother-in-law. You and Tracy can live like you used to." "All I have to do is sell my soul," Rick said quietly, mostly to himself. "Sell my soul? Am I the devil now?" Manny laughed and tossed his head back. "When did you become such a softy? Is it prison or Tracy that made you like this? It's not worth it," he said with a shrug. Rick's eyes flashed with anger. He moved so quickly that Manny didn't have time to grab his gun. In an instant, Rick had Manny by the shirt and was pushing him against the wall. When Manny came to his senses, he tried to grab the gun, but Rick was too strong. Rick seized Manny's wrist and slammed his hand against the wall. Breathing heavily, he said, "If you mention my wife again, you'll regret it. Do you hear me?" Suddenly, a sharp pain hit the back of Rick's head, making him release Manny and drop to the ground. Before he could recover, the thugs were on top of him. "You should go home, Pastor Rick. This is adult business. You're not a big deal. Your pride is just hurting you," one of them sneered. "People often mess up when they think they have everything under control." Before he could finish, Rick grabbed him by the shirt and pulled back to hit him. Mo bent over in pain, enough to take him out of the fight. Rick stood in his way and pulled out a worn-out photograph from his pocket. It was a picture of Anya, the same one he had when he went to prison. Whenever he felt like losing control, that picture brought him back. It reminded him of her beauty and innocence. She needed a dad. Speaking softly, he repeated, "I'm in control. I'm in control." His breathing steadied, and his anger slowly faded. He closed his eyes and let his rage slip away, ignoring Manny, who was still in the background, mesmerized by the chaos. Then he turned to Manny with a cold look and asked, "Will you ever be quiet?" Manny paused, looking pleased, but irritation crossed Rick's face. He shook his head and walked around. "Have you realized yet that all this is happening because you're such a jerk? You treat everyone poorly. Yes, fear and intimidation can work for a bit. But what happens when it's over? The people who hurt you weren't scared of you. Now you need help from someone else you can't intimidate. Since you messed up and got involved with his wife, now you have to make a deal with him. He'll help you fix things." Manny, who has a quick temper, nearly lost his cool. He was about to say something rude, but he stopped. There was a slight change in Rick's voice. Yes, he was being a jerk, but there was something more behind it. "Is this really a negotiation?" Rick gave a half smile but didn't say anything. Manny nodded, looking serious. He said, "I was thinking more like 25%. Rick pretended to think about it, then said, 75%. 75%? What are you talking about? You can't just raise the number." Rick shrugged and replied, "And you can't mess with my wife. Looks like we're both breaking the rules." Manny, looking annoyed, said, "Fine. After I pay the Colombians what I owe, we'll split what's left 50-50. He sighed, knowing this would cost him. Seeing the anger in Rick's eyes, Manny raised his hands in surrender and smiled. "Guilty. My mistake." He didn't want to ruin the shaky truce they had just made. Once Rick calmed down, Manny pointed to his unconscious workers and said, "You'll be the one explaining to them why they're not getting paid." Eric looked at the sleeping men with no care and smiled. "I'm sure I can persuade them." As Rick walked around the warehouse again, Manny watched him with a big grin. He didn't usually feel sentimental, but it was nice to have his friend back. Sure, right now Rick was really upset with him, but that could change. Giving a lot of money to someone could help fix past problems. "How much stuff did they take from you?" Rick asked, sounding like he meant business. "About 75,000, Manny replied. Rick nodded. "How much could you sell it for?" Manny said, "I could have sold it for about 2.5. He felt proud after doing the math in his head. Rick shrugged and started to walk away slowly. He stopped when he noticed a strange mark on the floor. To most people, it wouldn't stand out, but to Rick, it was a big deal. Tapping his foot on the stain, he said, "I see you didn't clean up the plastic. Or is this something else?" "It's none of your business," Manny shot back. Rick glared and said, "It is my business. I'm not going to jail for you again. You do reckless stuff like this." He tapped the stain again. "That's blood. When those crime scene guys shine a light on it, it'll be proof. If I'm getting involved in this, I need to know who it belongs to so we can deal with it." Manny grunted in agreement. "Okay, that's Donnie, but that stain shouldn't be here. I told those two to clean it up." Rick shook his head in disappointment. "I think you need to hire better people." "Yeah, I'll have HR look into it," Manny said, pinching the bridge of his nose. Rick let out a deep breath and said, "At least tell me you got rid of the evidence by yourself instead of leaving it to those two, okay?" "Forget you!" Mo shouted, finally waking up from his nap. He stood up a bit unsteady and looked at Rick. "You've got me. Boss, please let me off easy. Please." Manny laughed and checked him out from head to toe, like a referee after a big fight. "Are you sure you want to go another round, Rocky?" Mo's confidence faded as Manny laughed at him. Feeling angry, Mo nearly pleaded, "Just give me the word, Manny." "Calm down, little guy," Rick said, waving him off. "Why don't you head upstairs and let the grown-ups talk?" "Jerk," Mo said as he tried to go after Rick, who didn't even move. Manny got in the way and pushed Mo back, looking a bit annoyed. "Come on, sit down, Mo. We're trying to talk business here. Instead of begging, why don't you go wake up your little brother? You look like a kid in trouble." He pointed to Rick's smirk and added, "This isn't over." "We'll settle this later," Rick replied with a grin as Mo walked back to his partner. Rick looked at Manny, clearly worried. "Please tell me you got rid of the evidence yourself." Manny shook his head, looking guilty. Rick groaned. Manny wanted to keep himself safe, along with his friends. "Relax," he said quickly. "The bat is at the bottom of the river in Donnie's car, and Donnie took care of it." Still unsure, Rick asked, "Is that what you really know or what he told you?" Mo had now woken Tucker, who listened to the whole thing and was growing angrier by the minute. He jumped into the chat and said, "In case you haven't noticed, we're fine without you. The boss drives a fancy car, and I drive a nice one too. He lives in a penthouse, and I live in a condo. So what about you? You live at your mom's and take the bus?" Manny might think Mo isn't worth much, but he was saying some true things. Manny glanced at Rick, almost asking, "What are you going to do about it?" Mo, despite being a bit foolish, was hitting some good points, even if he said them after being knocked down. Rick didn't reply. He simply smiled. Then suddenly he said, "You know what, guys? I think I've had enough. I've got what I need. Maybe you're right, Mo. Maybe I should just go home, relax, listen to some music, and eat some asparagus." "Asparagus?" Manny laughed. "Is that what they fed you in prison?" With a knowing smile, Rick answered, "You have no idea." "No, not while I was there. Let me know if that changes." "What?" Rick leaned in closer and whispered, "You should have gone all out." Just as confusion turned to understanding, a loud bang caught their attention at the door. Eyes wide with shock and horror, they watched as SWAT teams rushed inside. Only Rick seemed calm. "Everyone on the ground now!" yelled the patrolman. Mo and Tuck quickly dropped to the floor. Rick and Manny locked eyes. Rick saw the hurt in Manny's gaze turn to angry rage. Then Manny looked down at his gun on the floor. Knowing Manny well, Rick understood what would happen next before anyone else did. But not today. You're not getting away that easily. Before Manny could jump down and reach for his gun, Rick rushed over and threw it aside. With the chance of self-harm gone, the patrolman tackled Manny, forcing him to the ground. He twisted Manny's arms behind his back and put handcuffs on him. Out from behind the guns came a detective in plain clothes, wearing a bulletproof vest over his shirt. As Manny fought back and shouted, the two men pulled him up roughly. They exchanged glances, and then the policeman smiled. "Manchester Childs, I'm happy to tell you that you are under arrest," he said. Manny replied with false bravado. "That's harassment, pig. Haven't we done this before? What do you think you have on me?" The detective smirked like a cat that got the canary. "Well, let's see. First, you confessed to getting $750,000 worth of drugs to sell for $2.5 million. You know, because you're so honest. Plus, we have—" The detective's smile got even bigger as he looked at where Rick's foot was tapping. Looking back at Manny, he finished, "The murder of Donald Childs. And now, because you talk too much, we know where to find the proof." He glanced at Rick, who nodded and added, "And if I remember right, I think you'll find the weapon in that room over there. Rick, you're a damn snitch. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to a lawyer. I will ruin you. Do you hear me? Anything you say can be used against you in court." Rick shook his head at Manny mockingly. If there was ever a time to be quiet, it's now. Manny, filled with blind anger, lunged at Rick. With his hands tied behind him, he charged like a bull. All he managed to do was get tackled to the ground again by three guys. They were not gentle. He hit the cold, hard floor face first. Mo and Tuck didn't put up a fight. They knew that any resistance could end badly. True to their nature, they shot furious looks at the snitch. Rick waved at Mo as he and his partner left the building. The detective looked at Rick in a way that was hard to understand and reached out his hand. "I never thought I'd say this to you, Mr. Morrison, but good job." Rick shrugged and shook the detective's hand. "Yeah, but I never thought I'd be shaking hands with a cop. Life is full of surprises, detective." The detective nodded. "I must say, you had us worried for a moment. We almost rushed in when things got rough. But then we heard you say you had it under control, so we waited for the safe word. I was curious how you were going to use the word asparaguses and sound relaxed." Rick laughed and nodded. "Yeah, I don't think I pulled it off. I really don't like asparagus." The detective gave Rick another strange look. This time, Rick understood it was a look of respect. "You know, there are officers with years of experience who can't stay calm like you. You had a gun pointed at you. Someone jumped you, trying to hit you where it hurts. Sure, you were a bit confused, but you still got him and one of his guys to see you. What you did tonight is amazing." Rick nodded, feeling grateful. "In another life, you would have been a great negotiator." "Yeah, in another life. Far from this one. No offense, but I like cops about as much as I like asparagus." The detective gave him a final friendly pat on the arm and walked away. Over his shoulder, he called out, "There are still some good cops around, Mr. Morrison. We can't all go to Narnia." Rick replied, "I'll have to take your word for it." Rick took a deep breath and looked around the warehouse one last time. He wouldn't mind never seeing this place again. With that thought, he headed for the exit. He walked past the SWAT team, the forensics team, and the flashing lights of many police cars. He found the car he wanted, opened the passenger door, and got in. Officer Giuliani looked at him with a proud smile. He patted Rick on the shoulder and asked, "How are you feeling, kid?" For some reason, Rick thought he should feel like a winner. He had beaten Manny at his own game, yet something felt off. He felt like a traitor. Rick answered truthfully, leaning back against the seat with a sad sigh. The officer nodded, took a sip of his coffee, and placed it back in the holder. "You know, what you did here was amazing, whether you see it or not. When you called and said you were willing to tell the truth about Manchester, I was surprised. But I wasn't shocked at all. You are one of the few who got out of prison for what you did. You really want to change and be a better person, even if it means giving up easy money. People like you make me feel hopeful and keep me here at this table. Thank you for that, kid." Rick looked up at him, sighing with worry. He looked very tired, as if he carried a heavy burden inside. Looking out at the mess outside the window, he said, "If it's okay with you, Officer Giuliani, I want to go home. I need to see my wife." The policeman nodded in understanding. "I get it. As soon as they take the microphone off you, I'll take you home." Rick nodded with gratitude, got out of the car, and looked for the detective. When Rick got home, the sun was shining brightly in the living room. He tried to come in quietly to not wake anyone, but Cynthia was barely asleep on the couch. She opened her eyes the moment she heard noise. She did not know what she hoped to see. Her heart still couldn't believe that her husband might be gone. Could he just be hiding from Manny? Donnie was smart enough not to run into a dangerous person like Manchester without a plan, but the look on Rick's face when he met her eyes was not good. It was full of regret. "Did you find him?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Rick sighed, searching for the right words before he said, "When I left here last night, I went to see my probation officer. He knows the cop who's looking into Manny." Cynthia gasped in fear. "What? You went to the cops?" "Yeah, I had to." She jumped up from the couch and yelled, "I asked you to talk to Manny about Donnie, not the police. Oh no, this is bad. If they search the house, Donnie is definitely gone. What will me and the kids do if he goes to jail?" "Oh my God," Cynthia cried. Rick grabbed her shoulders to calm her down and said softly, "Donnie's dead." He didn't want to say it again. The words hung in the air. He saw the shock spread across her face. Her lips moved, but only strange sounds came out until she finally whispered, "He can't be dead. I saw him just yesterday." She looked at him as if she was begging him to take back those 2 words. She would have accepted anything but that. But he couldn't give her what she wanted or say what she needed to hear. Instead, he continued, "Manny confessed to it." The horrible weight of that sentence hit her hard. Tears streamed down her cheeks, showing her pain and fear. "No, no, no!" she screamed as her shaking body started to fall apart in front of him. She sank down, unable to carry the weight of her new reality, and began to collapse to the floor. Rick quickly noticed that she was about to fall, so he rushed to catch her and led her to the couch. "Oh no!" she cried as her sadness poured out in loud sobs. She cried hard into Rick's chest, hitting him lightly with her small fists. "He can't be dead! You're not telling the truth! Please don't lie!" Rick felt like they weren't alone anymore. Looking toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, he saw his wife and mother-in-law watching. They both looked very sad as the woman in Rick's arms mourned her loss. When he met his wife's gaze, she saw his bruised face from his fight earlier, and her worry for the woman faded as new concerns took over. "Rick, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" Tracy asked in a very polite way. He wanted to refuse because he didn't want to leave Cynthia alone, but Tracy's serious tone made him curious. He told Cynthia he would be right back and joined Tracy at the dining room table. "How are you?" he asked, trying to hide his impatience. "What's going on?" She raised her eyebrow and replied, "You took my phone and left last night without saying anything. And then you went to the police about Manny? Plus, you look like you've been in a fight. What is happening?" "It's a long story," he said. "I'm listening." He began to explain briefly, but he should have left out some details. Before he could finish, she interrupted him when he mentioned meeting 3 guys in a warehouse while wearing a wire hidden as a belt buckle. "Wait, what?" Tracy shouted in shock. "You wore a wire to talk to Manny and his men, and you went there alone. Are you insane?" Rick felt discouraged by her angry reaction. Then he felt insulted by her double standards. "Yes, with Manny, the same dangerous guy you've been seeing behind my back." Her face showed anger as she said, "So you did this for revenge? You risked your life just to get back at me? Isn't that why you messed around with him in the first place?" Martha, who had quietly come into the kitchen and was listening, realized the argument was getting out of hand. The louder they became, the less sense they made. She was sure that their sad guest in the living room could hear everything. "Will you both stop it?" she shouted sharply, making them both pause and look at her. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. She said, "This poor woman just found out her husband was hurt and you 2 are arguing about it. This is not the right time or place for this. We need to focus on her right now, not on your drama," she continued. "Do you understand me?" Like scolded kids, they both looked down at the floor and said, "Yes, ma'am." She sighed in relief and smiled at the quiet. Then she turned to her son-in-law. She went on, "That woman needs to talk to the police. They will be looking for her with a lot of questions. It would be best if she could get there first with someone to help her. I know you had a tough night, but we can't let her handle this alone. I think the two of us should go with her to the station." Rick nodded and said, "I was just thinking the same thing." She touched his cheek gently, proud that he agreed with her. Then her expression turned serious and she said, "Before we do anything, there's something very important you need to do. It's probably the best thing for everyone right now." "What is it?" he asked. "Take a shower," she said with a playful smile. This made them all laugh, easing the tension in the room. Rick left to clean up. Tracy tried to go too, but her mom grabbed her arm. "You know he did that for you and Anna, right?" Tracy looked down and nodded. "I could tell Manny coming to my work worried him a bit." She gave a bitter smile and added, "That made him finally stop avoiding me." Martha looked at her with admiration and said, "I don't think anything scares him more than losing you two. He would risk anything for you, even his own life. But that's what scares me more. He could have died tonight. I can't lose him again. I won't survive it," Tracy said, starting to cry. Martha hugged her tightly and gently stroked her hair. "It's time for you both to learn to talk to each other. You need to share your feelings without anger. Then you can keep fighting for each other," she added. Tracy nodded, resting her head on her mom's shoulder. A strong determination filled her. She was going to fight for her family and her marriage. But first, she had to work on herself. She needed to let go of the deep anger that rose inside her every time she thought of life without Rick. She felt the pain of betrayal. Yes, she had been unfaithful, but he had hurt her first. He cheated with Manny when he chose to keep her around longer than he should have. Did Rick's love for his family make him forget about Manny? That's exactly what he did. In the end, he picked Manny, so now she had to do the same. Rick was right about one thing. What she did was small and mean. She could see that. But it didn't make her feel any better. She loved a man who didn't love her back as much. But she told Rick yesterday that she would always choose him in the end, even if he didn't pick her. And that wouldn't change. Next chapter. Making the choice to do what he did was really hard for him. It felt like he was forcing himself to be someone he was not. But when Manny showed up at Tracy's job yesterday, he had to figure out what was more important. He faced the same choice he had made almost 5 years ago: street honor or family. For him, that choice was never just about Manny. Sure, Manny was his best friend back then, but Rick would have done the same for anyone on his team. In the end, Rick didn't pick Manny over Tracy. He picked himself. Being a husband and father felt small next to being a tough guy. But yesterday, Manny went to Walmart not to help Tracy, but to send Rick a message. He wanted Rick to see that he could reach her if he wanted to. Even their past friendship wouldn't stop him. Tracy was a pawn to him because she was Rick's queen. When Manny really wanted something, he left a person with only 2 choices: do what he said and rest easy at night, or don't. But Rick had made the unclear choice clear. Now the question was, who would respond to Manny's not-so-subtle move, the husband or the tough guy? The Rick from before would have acted like a thug. He would have grabbed a gun, forced one of Manny's friends to tell him where to find him, and broken into his home. Manny would come home to find Rick sitting on the couch, sipping his best wine with a grin and a gun in his lap. It would have ended in a big shootout, and either way, it would mean he was out of the family for good. But the Rick who stood here now was different. This Rick would always choose Tracy and would never leave her on purpose. That was the only honor he cared about. Next chapter. That afternoon, Rick and Martha went with Cynthia to the police station. By then, Mo had already answered many questions about his statements about the butcher. The police found the store, arrested the workers, and discovered parts of Donnie's body. He had been cut into parts, packed away, and was going to be taken to different places to be thrown away. That's how Manny got rid of his victims. This was the secret behind Casey's Fine Meats, which was really a butcher shop. It was one of his many cover-ups. Cynthia recognized Donnie's head. She got sick and fainted. Mo didn't just confess to killing Donnie. When he sat down in a dull gray room with a 2-way mirror, he began to sing in his head, "And I will always love you now." It turned out that he and Tuck were smarter than everyone thought. They were the ones who stole from Manny. They were tired of working for him. They were tired of being treated badly and feeling like they could be next in line to be hurt. They hoped that the Sanchez family would take care of Manny and maybe see them as more than just workers. But what Mo felt sorry for the most was Donnie's death. He knew everyone would blame Donnie, which worked well for his plans. People would look the other way and no one would get hurt. After all, Donnie was Manny's cousin. He was the one person Manny wouldn't kill right then. Donnie's ghost would follow him forever. In the months that followed, Manchester Childs became one of the most talked about names in the news. The case had everything you'd find in a thrilling story, ending with the bad guy getting caught in a big fight with the police. There was no way this exciting news would go away soon. Each week, new and shocking details came out. The police raided a butcher shop. They arrested small-time drug dealers, leading to even more confessions. By the end of it all, Manny became the youngest and worst gangster caught in recent times. He had a better chance of being taken by aliens than living freely again, unless he told on the Sanchez family. Rick was happy the police kept their promise not to mention him. He didn't want fame. He just wanted to keep to himself and stay out of trouble. Where he came from, being a snitch wasn't seen as brave, even against someone as well known as Manny. People still didn't like him. Of course, there were rumors about his role, but no one said anything to him directly. Right or wrong, he was still Rick. Besides, his past made many people overlook him. He had already served time for Manny. So why would he turn on the investigation? It was probably good for him that Manny stayed quiet about his affair with Tracy. Not many would take that news well. All Rick had to do was live his life, follow his parole, and become an ordinary citizen like everyone else. Yeah, that was easier said than done. Rick might have helped take a criminal off the streets and earned praise from the police, but the path ahead was still tough. But not knowing about his past had a big downside. In the eyes of the business world, he was still a person who once went to prison. Places that hired people with criminal records didn't do it out of kindness. They took them in because they could let them go easily. The pay was low, and no one cared about how they were treated. He might be a free man, but the memories of prison still gripped him like chains. His past followed him everywhere, from job to job. Martha worked with Rick, trying to help him appear less scary at work. The toughness that helped him on the streets only made things harder at his jobs. They both worked on making him friendlier, speaking clearly and keeping his cool. He hoped that one day someone would see him as someone trying to change for the better. But life doesn't always go the way we want, just like a skunk smell that lingers. No matter what he did, his criminal record stuck with him. Imagine your short, middle-aged boss making fun of you in front of everyone, just to feel powerful by pushing the big guy around. Or the heavy feeling of being blamed whenever something was lost. What about the fact that some women in the office didn't feel safe, even though he had done nothing to make them feel that way? This was his experience in every job. It was hard to hold on to pride, especially when it felt like he was swallowing bitter pills every day. But whenever anger bubbled up inside him, he would pull out a crumpled photo of Anya from his pocket. It reminded him of what he was fighting for. And then, finally, things started to change. Martha began dating a nice man after being alone for a long time. She was a bit out of practice, but he was kind and patient with her. While it didn't mean much to Rick, for Martha, her new boyfriend being a business owner was important, especially since he owned a chain of hair salons. But don't forget that Manny ran other businesses that were not clean. Which one did Rick work at? Oh, right, the barber shop. Skip ahead 2 years. I met Rick again. I rang the buzzer of the same building, bundled up in a thick coat. The cold wind hit my face, which was the only part of me that was exposed. "Can I help you?" a familiar voice said in a bored way. "Derek Morrison," he replied. The buzzer rang loudly, telling him to hurry inside. He walked over to Linda's desk and smiled. She looked at him with the same lack of interest she always had during his time there. "You may pass," she said in a casual tone, and returned to her computer. Rick thought to himself, "I bet she only plays solitaire on that thing," as he walked toward the office. He tapped lightly on the glass of the open door to get Officer Giuliani's attention before stepping inside and sitting down. "Mr. Morrison, it's good to see you today," the officer said as he opened the folder in front of him. Rick nodded back. This is your last probation visit. I'm happy about that. You've been a pain for me, he joked. But it's a big pain. I think you can manage it. He grinned. Besides, I know you'll miss me. Oh, I'll miss you like I miss getting a headache, Officer Giuliani replied, a little sternly but with a hint of a smile. Is there such a thing as a charming headache? The officer asked. They both chuckled. For Rick, this last visit felt good but a little sad. He was glad to be done with probation, but knew he would miss Officer Giuliani. The officer had really changed his life for the better. He was one of the good ones. The rest of the visit went by fast. Rick didn't have to take a drug test, and they didn't talk about his job hunting. He liked his job at the barber shop. He got along well with his co-workers and had regular customers. He was making good money. Now he and Tracy had their own apartment downtown and a new car. Things were finally looking brighter for him. When Officer Giuliani took him outside for a smoke break, he said, "By the way, congratulations on your baby. I know I'm late with this. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl?" Beaming with pride, Rick replied, "Anna is having a baby brother. His name is Noah." "Noah?" Officer Giuliani repeated, nodding as he thought about it. "I like that name. It's very traditional." "Yes," Rick said. "That's why I picked it. Noah was a good man who survived the flood and listened to what was right, even when things were tough." Officer Giuliani smiled and shook Rick's hand. "I'm glad he did." As they said goodbye, both men felt the important mark they had left on each other's lives. Some people come into your life for a short time while others stay for a long time. Yet even brief connections can leave lasting impressions. In the next moment, Rick brushed the snow off his boots before unlocking the front door. He wasn't in the mood for Tracy's talk about getting snow on the carpet. My front door, he thought, enjoying how that felt. It was where he lived with his family. Dad! That was the greeting he got inside as his little girl rushed toward him. He picked her up and tickled her belly. You're getting too big for Daddy to pick you up. What does Mommy feed you? Hot dogs? She squealed, trying to squirm away from his tickles. Tracy walked over, cradling her round belly. Her feet were bare and swollen, making almost no sound on the carpet. She stood on her toes, kissed him, and then frowned at his shoes. I knocked all the snow off them, he said, trying to defend himself as he sensed trouble coming. She looked at him with a disapproving face. They're still wet, Rick. That's why I want you to take them off outside before you walk on my carpet. Okay. He gave in, letting his daughter down. He took off his shoes and carried them to the hall closet. Then he turned to his wife, making a big gesture with his hand as if to ask if she was satisfied. She just rolled her eyes at him in annoyance. Rick couldn't help but stare at her, amazed. How could anyone be so beautiful? Maybe he was a bit biased because she was pregnant with their second child. But if he had to pick the most beautiful woman in the world, it would still be her. Dinner was ready soon after, and the family sat down at the table. Tracy looked at each of them, feeling happy. Everything was perfect. This is what she dreamed of every night when Rick was not there. She didn't need money or fancy cars to be happy. Everything she wanted was right here at the table, with spaghetti in their hands. But despite this, she felt sad inside, pushing away the happy feelings. She couldn't shake off her guilt. She almost lost this happiness, and part of her felt she deserved to. What would her life be if Rick hadn't forgiven her? What if he had just left? Or worse, she was so caught up in her thoughts that she didn't notice the tears streaming down her face. It was only when Rick looked at her with concern that she realized how much sadness showed on her face. Trace, what's wrong? He asked. She tried to collect her thoughts to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I just what, baby? A sob she had been holding back finally escaped her. Rick stood up and knelt beside her, gently rubbing her back. She finally managed to say, I'm just so happy. He smiled and stroked her arm. Me too. I was reluctant about marriage counseling at first, but I'm glad your mom pushed for it. I think she's our guardian angel. Oh my God, Tracy said, bursting into tearful laughter. Please don't ever tell her that. She already thinks she knows everything. He lightly kissed her lips, which were wet from her tears. I love you. I love you too, Rick. At that moment, their little girl Anya, with spaghetti sauce on her mouth, wanted attention. She lifted her hands and asked, Who loves me? Both parents shared a playful look before rushing over to her. Anya squealed and giggled as they kissed her cheeks loudly. In the news, there was a report about the body of a well-known criminal from Manchester who had been involved in a drug ring for almost 10 years. His trial went on for almost 9 months. One day, he suddenly said he was guilty instead of not guilty. People close to the case say he made this choice to help the district attorney. In return, he would give information about his supplier to get a lighter punishment. No one has seen or heard from Mr. Childs in almost a year. It is thought that he was being protected by the police. Investigators haven't said if they think the police had anything to do with his death. Still, they are not saying it's impossible either. Records show that Mr. Childs made between $3 million and $4 million every week. He had no family to take care of his belongings. The investigation is still going on. We will share more news when we have it. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.